Welcome back this morning, ladies and gentlemen, to the conclusion of this little workshop. We appreciate everyone being here again. Before we start the meeting, I'm gonna ask Brenda to just give us a little invocation, then we'll get started.
Oh, wise Creator, we're so thankful and grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve mankind, especially the students and staff of the public schools of Robeson County. Therefore, we ask you to allow our meditation and thought pattern to be completely geared toward them in the best interest of the public schools of Robeson County from this day forth and forevermore. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Again, good morning to everyone. Thank you for day 2 of our workshop to have a conversation. I thought we had a wonderful conversation last night. You asked some powerful questions, and so that will be a lead-in for us on this morning. I do want to say welcome to Grady. Hope your father's doing well. I do appreciate the board members' comments last night of how much we do appreciate the work that's going on in the district. No denial, it's hard work. It's hard work every single day. But the cause is right. We can close that learning slide and make a difference to get kids back on track and that. But again, you can't back away from the work. It's critical work. And we'll get to some point when it really becomes a little bit easier because we move from presentations and PD to practice. And practice is always easier because the norm. Out of the questions last night that you asked, I want to give you kind of the context of all this work or the backdrop, because what you asked is what we share with principals and district folks. So how are we going to operate? How are we going to roll this out? And so you have this package, and I walked through it very quickly. The manual, you're going to recognize that first one, R to the third power. It's about relationships, right? It really is. We raised that last night over and over. Relationship from the district staff to employees in the building, relationship between the board, the superintendent, board members, and employees of this district. And we're building powerful relationships. Then the relevance. Why does all this matter? Why does it fit? Can't have random acts all over the place. There's got to be a common language, and we have that conversation. And then finally, we get to the rigor. I've been saying to the district staff, to principals, our first 90 days is to roll out our plan, our vision, how we're going to make this happen. The next 90 days, we're trying to create a new baseline. So the rigor has to be there. It's the next 90 days that we're going to move to the third R, and that's the rigor of this work, because we should have things in place that we can begin to get some data, clear data, that'll help us create that. Look at the second page, and again, this is old stuff, you know it, you've seen it. Stages of change. It's important that we understand where we are, right? We cannot remain at knee-jerk reaction, that we're surprised by the data. We're surprised by the conversations. We didn't anticipate there were going to be pushback. Those kinds of things in leadership can exist because you have to be able to anticipate that moves you from random acts, that moves you from a knee-jerk reaction that you've already pre-planned in terms of what's going to happen that you can roll out. The part that's critical is have the plan ready, like you know, so that when folks go to that question, you're already ready and you can move on with that. Look at the North Star. Our journey is new. You said that last night. I was so glad. Nobody was blaming anybody. We dealt with the numbers. We dealt with the facts, and we all realized the work, right? If you get caught up in a blame game, nothing's going to work.
Right.
Everything was so positive, and we want to say this morning to our parents and to our employees, we're supporting you, we're supporting this work, and we appreciate it so much. Not in the blame, we're dealing with the facts. Look on the left, the plus minus, so through the stages of change, you can have some sense of when you're improving, right? Because you want to get to the positive side of this work. But you got to go through the stages. You got to have tough conversations. You got to deal with pushback, those kinds of things. Look at the next step, and this is identifying existing conditions, barriers and blind spots. Don't understand that there are barriers. One of the things that we said to principals is, and that old saying, how did you eat the elephant? Most people will respond to that how? Right at the time. We said, no, we're going to change that narrative. We're going to cut him up and give everybody a piece so we can get that barrier, that elephant out of the room. There's no given law that you take it one bite. Just cut them up, clear them out, get them gone, and we move on. So those barriers and blind spots. Now, one of the barriers historically in the past have been lack of funding. That is not an issue, right? We have more money than we've ever had before. But we're beginning to move to the positive side of the work, and we'll get there. That's about 90 days, and that conversation is so critical for us. Look at the next thing, changing the culture, changing our behavior. How do we think? How do we process? How do we approach the work? So align people, structures, and systems. Systems are critical. Systems should provide for us, like you know, and again, nothing new, data that it take us 6 months. If we have the right systems in place, we have it in a formative way, instrumental, that we can make that decision within that same instructional day. And we're beginning to see that happen for us. And then we're on the positive side, though, when we do that alignment piece, we want to be innovative in the way that we teach, in the way that kids learn, and the way our classrooms look. If our classrooms, most classrooms look the same that they looked in 1960 when you walk in. They really do. Arrangement and all those kinds of things. So we got to be innovative. And how part of that conversation last night was how can we innovate? Where does online really fit? Can we train folks? So stages of change, so you know where we at. We're at stage 2 now. We're trying to set meaningful expectations. That's what this workshop is about. So that you and board members, when you get calls, will be able to say, yeah, we had that conversation. This is the intent. That's a clear expectation of the district to help move our kids. Any questions on that? Again, nothing new, just how we operate. We had a lot of questions about communication. It is the key, right?
Yes.
You can only hold somebody accountable when you know they do it what you're saying. Otherwise, you can't. So communication is a two-way, right? You got to provide that communication. You got to have feedback. Again, you can never hold anybody accountable if they're not clear on what you asked them. So we rolled out this model of the principles. Across the top is where we want to be. A clear vision, skills, incentives, resources, action plans. What will we get?
This.
Success, no question. That's a formula that will work. Something's missing, and that's why your communication comments and ours are so critical. Look at the next line. You can have vision, skills, incentive, resources, but if an action plan is missing, the false starts. The worst thing in this journey is false starts. I have to start over because we didn't plan it right. We didn't organize it right. We didn't look at the right data. We didn't analyze. That's the worst thing in the world. You're losing valuable time that we don't have if we have false starts. So it's the communication piece, on and on and on. Look at, for instance, vision, skill, but if incentives are missing, what are you going to get? Resistance. That's why it was critical that we provide for our folks supplements, stipends, because we are asking more. We're asking hour and a half on Saturday, once a month. But we have incentives in place. We're paying for that time because we realize the time is valuable. Critical, but on and on and on. So this is the model that we're operating from and how we're communicating to leaders in our buildings, and we're asking leaders to communicate to our employees so everybody will be on the same page. We've got to have that first line, and that's what we're working towards. Any questions? Yeah, nothing complicated, it's just the way that we're doing business, folks understand. That question was, this one's going north, this one's going south, this one's going west, this one's going east, and all in the same building. That's the problem, right? That is the problem. So we talked about and have shared with folks random acts of improvement. Not gonna happen. If it's random, there's a lack of plan, there's a lack of direction, lack of support, all those pieces to that. And so look what it is. Look at that piece. Errors are where? All over the place. Look for processes on the wrong side, right? Processes was an afterthought. That was an afterthought, so it's never gonna work. You didn't have the conversation. You didn't anticipate. Look at goals. And so random acts, and that was a powerful question, is what we're trying to eliminate. Have that common language that everybody understands this is where we're headed and why. Look at the next page. We're operating a line management system. Look at the difference in those models. Where's process? It's on the front end. It's on the front end of the work. Look at all the arrows, they're headed in the same direction. Line, common language, clear vision of what it is that we're trying to do. Now, look on the right. You see that little box with all those arrows? You know what that is? That's uncontrollable variables, what we talked about last night. There are some variables out of our control that we can't manage, can't do anything with. But look where they're at. Those variables only show up because we've gone through a clearly defined process. Now, as we grow and improve, will those uncontrollable variables ever go away? The answer is no. You know why? Because as we grow and improve, it creates a whole new set of questions, a whole new set of variables that we have to deal with. Those uncontrollable variables is positive, always, because we need to hear. We need to know what the criticism is and how we can react to the criticism. So the question says, let's share the backdrop of how we are operating, what we're saying to leaders. Then the last thing I'll say is, who's communicating? Again, principals as the instructional leaders, that's what we're holding. But we're sharing all the information, all the systems, everything. Yeah. But I love the questions, and so we talked and said, let's share the backdrop of all the presentations and how we're moving forward in our business. Any questions, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question. I just have a statement.
Okay.
I 2,000% agree with what you said in the background here. There's just one, we may or may not have a group of people would say, okay, it's accepted that our errors were not aligned. It's accepted there were variables we couldn't control. So I'm not going to worry about where we are. I think it's okay. I think that we have to be careful too of people settling for being substandard, having bad scores, and people not having that urge to improve based on this philosophy. What do you think about that?
We're saying that. We shared a piece of information, and maybe Wendy Jennifer can talk about that. If we can get 10%, and we're at the 10% mark, we're beyond that. We know from just conversations from principals and from teachers, if we can get to 10%, we're going to move forward. The issue is, a lot of time, those conversations is to stop the work because we don't want to change. You know, one of the major pushbacks is that, yeah, you got to teach different, right? Your instructional day has to change. You cannot use the same lesson design that you used 5 years ago.
Right.
That doesn't force you to have to learn something. There are new standards.
That's right.
And then our interpretation of the standards that exist will change as our data change and improve. And so it's about that willingness not to be complacent, but to do the work. That's what a lot of the Saturday pushback has been about, that very issue. Because out of that classwork, and they're going to talk about that, it's going to create, based on the data, individual learning plans for students. You know what that means? That means then your whole group work is going to decrease, and your small group and individual student work is going to increase. That means you got to plan different. That means you have to put more time where you could put that time in a whole group. You've got to spend that time now on individual students and their needs based on the data and what that. Yes, that's an issue. That's an issue.
You have a question, Randy?
Well, I just wanted to say last night, and I was going to say it last night, but it was better to say it this morning because Dr. Williamson's got this. And it's one direction and one goal. I do want to say and commend this board and Dr. Williamson and his staff, his cabinet, that the things that's been brought to this board to approve, we've approved them. Since the principals, coaches, and the mentor process, and giving the schools the direction that Dr. Williamson has for us to grow, and to see some pluses instead of negatives, and that the money that has been appropriated is being well spent. The likes that we've never seen before in Robeson County, so to speak. And I just commend you and your cabinet and the employees of the public schools and the ones that's on board. You know, you always have some spares out there, but that we're moving forward. It's a good direction, and I commend you and your cabinet on that.
Thank you so much. Well, in front of it, we appreciate the board. We appreciate you because you're stepping out on faith with us. No question about that. This is different. You get phone calls and emails, and we appreciate the support. We're going to get to where we need to be. There's no question. And we want to celebrate that process. Again, the question about the strategic plan was a powerful question. But the response is we got to create a new day baseline, and that's what we're doing. Thank you, board. We don't take it for granted, your support. We appreciate every time you send us a piece of information, we can research and get an answer to clarity and communication that you can. We're going to have a gap, and we're going to miss something, or we're going to miss the kids, or whatever the case might be.
If, Dr. Williamson, when you're talking about change, and we know sometimes change is hard for anybody, and there was an analogy at one time that the person said they'd been teaching 20 years. And they come back and said, no, they hadn't been teaching 20 years. They'd been teaching 1 year. Because for the 20 years, they'd done the same thing, the same way the whole time. So they hadn't really, never changing. And sometimes we have to change. And that's what, we see all this year. And you're going to get people that don't want to change. But if you get 2 or 3, them 2 or 3 gets 2 more, and then things will change. It's not going to all happen overnight. It's a process like got here. It's going to take time. Some of this is old stuff, but it's good stuff. It's still very, very relevant today. So, and I thank you too.
Appreciate that.
Henry?
I think the big thing here too, Dr. Williamson, is the ultimate leader. You as the superintendent. You're transparent about how we're going to move forward, and we will move forward. You're sticking to your guns. And second of all, you're holding people accountable. And we're all holding each other accountable. And we're working together as a team. I see not only just the board members, but also your cabinet. Just like I heard Dr. Freeman speak about her and Dr. Locklear's offices coming together and reconciling and saying, we're going to merge and we're going to work together. These 2 departments are going to work together. And that's what it's going to take.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, thank you for your support. We're going to get there. You're going to see in the presentation that old comment, I taught it. That doesn't work. That's not even the question, right? The question is, did they learn it? Thank you so much.
Amy?
Me for just a second.
So again, good morning and welcome back. We're very excited to hear the conversation that we just heard this morning. Very, very thankful. So as I left here last night, I was very excited. Went home. I was very, very excited in a very different way than I have been for a very long time. Can't say enough thanks to all of you that are here this morning and where we're headed as a district. Text the team, tried not to text them during the middle of the night, so I managed not to do that. But I did text them early this morning. But again, I want to go back and redirect where we were last night and what we want to start off again to build today, the conversations around where we're headed today, what we plan to accomplish, the vision, mission, and goals, and where we're going. So last night I asked this question, what does this number represent? And 1,025 instructional hours. That was as of August the 23rd. Yesterday was day 29, 174 hours in, with 851 hours left. So we have 851 hours to complete complete the tasks that are ahead. And with that being said, we talked about last night, guiding questions. Those guiding questions. What does teaching and learning look like? What does teaching and learning sound like? And are we fixated on learning? Those are driving questions we must continue to ask ourselves as we move forward. So with that being said, we talked a lot about the funding. And Cole, if we can slide through to the funding segment, we're going to start today with instructional excellence and alignment. So we're beginning today with instructional excellence and alignment. So we did receive lots of funding, and oftentimes it's interesting because I have people to say to me, "You're the money lady." No, I'm just the steward of the money. The money belongs to all of us, but most importantly, the money belongs to the children and how we're going to move those children forward. How are we going to use that money wisely? How are we going to see that we're having that impact? And impact, I learned a long time ago, you can get lots of resources. Impact can occur one of three ways: a positive impact, a negative impact, or no impact at all. So with the money we're receiving, what are we anticipating? We're anticipating those scores going up and us doing the right work along the way. One thing I've said for many, many years, success doesn't happen at the end of the school year. The EOG or the EOC is the final measure. But if we've done the right work along the way, then success has occurred along the way. Success is progression. We can't wait to the end of the year. Dr. Williamson often talks about the common formative assessments. That is the easiest way throughout this year that we're going to know if we're being successful. When we do those common formative assessments, if we see that the children are progressing in the right direction, then what have we had? We've had success. But if they're not progressing in the way that we had hoped, then we have to take a back step and we have to begin to say, what are we doing and what do we need to do differently? And that's what the team will come forth later today in conversation and share with you. So if we could go to the next slide on our ESSER funding. So we wanted to think about how do we share the funding and what does the funding support as we move forward. So we are actually sharing the ESSER funding. I think Erica actually has the budgets. You have a handout. I don't know if those have been shared yet with. Good. So you actually have the budgets for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, but we want to look at how that funding supports the work that we're doing. So when we're looking at ESSER 3, if you'll look up, we're starting, what did we put in place to support that instructional excellence? And how are we aligning those services? So you'll notice that we have there the nursing standards. Why would we have nursing standards? We're responding to COVID. We know that those children with COVID have a lot of health and safety needs. A universal need of our students, first and foremost, is health and safety. If you have that health and safety, then a lot of these other pieces won't matter. So if you'll notice in ESSER, we put in nursing standards for 2 or more years. We're still working with those nursing standards. We've actually developed a plan with RCC because as with any district, what we're experiencing are staffing concerns. We've been looking for nursing standards for quite some time. So we've reached out to the RCC president and she is working with us with CNAs and LPNs at this time. So we're moving in a different direction. We were not able to find them as we had hoped. However, that has not deterred us from the mission. We are still moving in that direction. So we have those. We have school psychologists. Kara and Philip will later on talk about the second step curriculum. That curriculum is to address those social and emotional needs of our students. I hear them every day in our department. We get gaggle alerts routinely. We're seeing them more and more in the buildings. We're seeing children talking about self-harm, suicide. We're seeing all of that come, and that we believe and know that that is a continuing and direct result of COVID. So we are moving forward there. We have interventionists. Those will be the folks that are actually going into the schools, and they're going to be working with our K-2 students with Letterland because we know there are deficiencies with literacy skills, so they'll be working with that process. Again, 6 nurses that we're working toward. We've added additional social workers. We've been able to place 20 teacher assistants in the building. with 16 more forthcoming. And also progress monitoring, which a great deal of our conversation this morning will be about classworks. So are there any questions as we're moving forward into the presentation for instructional excellence and alignment? Yes.
Hey, Dr. May.
Ms. Jennifer, tell me one more time the difference between the duties of a nurse extender and a regular nurse. Just tell me one more time.
They're basically the same. They're the same. We're going to do the nurse extenders more with contact tracing. We're going to
Okay.
assist with contact tracing at this time. And they'll be working with them to find those students. Also, they'll be assisting them, for example, vision screening. They'll be getting those students into that area, helping that nurse look through the vision and working through that process. But our main focus right now is contact tracing,
Thank you.
so that our nurses can be relieved of a lot of that contact tracing, not directly, but indirectly as we move forward. Any other questions before the team comes forward? So we'll begin with Tara. She is new to our team. She has done a phenomenal job. She is new to the department. She is not new to the district. So I would like to say that she has been a powerful, powerful asset so far. We're very similar. We joke all the time about our moms, Jackie and Janelle. So we are very blessed to have her. She's done an outstanding job, and she's very passionate, and she fits very well into our department. So Tara, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak before you this morning. We're going to talk about MTSS, which is Multi-Tiered System of Support. I know you've probably heard that acronym over and over and over again. You're getting some phone calls about it, but all MTSS is a framework for school improvement. And I would argue that MTSS is what great teachers have always done. It's a way of looking at the entire child, the whole child, to make sure that we are providing the supports and interventions necessary so that every child is successful. Not just my child, not just Philip's children, but everybody's children should be coming to school, should be learning, and they should be learning at high levels. So what I want to challenge you all this morning to think of MTS as much a way of thinking as it is a process of doing. Just let that settle in a little bit this morning. So it's much a way of thinking as it is a process of doing. Now, as part of some of the presentations we've been doing with principals and APs and some other folks we've been looking at what our belief systems are, because it's what we believe drives what we do, right? So fundamental to MTSS is that all students can learn. That has to be a fundamental belief, that every child can learn and that every child can learn at high levels. Because we all know, everybody in here, we all know that majority of the children that come through those school doors every day did not grow up in homes that we grew up in. Can we agree to that?
Yes.
They don't grow up in the homes that we grew up in. So it is our responsibility to advocate for all of those little boys and girls that are coming into our buildings every single day who did not grow up in homes that we grew up in. Whether that's attending to their social-emotional needs, whether that's an academic need, whether there's some behavior needs, or whether there's some attendance needs. Because ultimately, we've got to bridge the gap. We've got to do a better job of bridging the gap. And Dr. Williamson has already made mention of this. This is going to be a mind shift, a cultural shift for our district, because we have got to do things differently. We cannot continue to do the same things we've been doing and expect different results. It's just not going to happen. And yes, again, there have been lots of variables. Pandemic, hurricanes, right? It's always going to be something. But prior to all that, we'll go on a little journey. Prior to all of those big pieces that have happened to Robinson County in the past 7-8 years, right? What did the scores look like then? Was it something to be excited about?
Everybody seen, wasn't it?
So I would argue this morning that hurricanes, pandemic, have exacerbated the problem. It's just made it worse. Just called it out for what it was, and we're sitting in worse shape than we've ever been. Because we've got to do some things differently. So what I would argue is that if you take a look up there at that traditional formula for learning. Constants and variables, that sound familiar to you all? Constants being the things that stay the same. Variable meaning changes, right? So take a look at that. Targeted instruction, if that's constant, if time is a constant, and learning is the variable. Do we want learning to be a variable? They may or may not get it. Is that what we want? What do you know about the history of public education? Would you say this is a true statement, that the history of public education was to ensure that all students learn at high levels? You think that's the history of our public education system?
Not the history. They receive a sound basic education is a history.
For every child?
Well, I would say that, but that's not what's behind it.
You're correct, because that's not the intent of public education, never was, historically speaking. But that's the way we continue to operate, right? We're continuing to operate this way, where the targeted instruction, right, 8 to 3, whole group, the time, I'm gonna give Philip and Ms. Freeman and Lindy, all three of them are gonna get the same amount of time, even though they got different needs, right? They're just gonna get the same amount of time. I don't have time to do all that other stuff. And at the end of the day, they might get it, they might not. We cannot continue to operate that way anymore. So moving forward, this is what we need to make in terms of that shift in our thinking, is that the instruction has got to be variable. What I do for Mr. Simmons is not the same thing I can do for Mr. Smith,
That's right.
because I've got to meet them where they are.
That's right.
The time has to be variable. No, we're not talking about extending the school day or the school year. But if Mr. Smith needs an additional 30 minutes of my time during the school day because the other children had it, but he didn't get it, and I need to spend a little bit more time with him, that's what I got to be able to do.
This is competency-based learning.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, what is constant? The learning.
Learning.
The learning is constant, and that's where we got to get to. So our goal is that we've got to implement a systematic process to ensure that every child receives the additional time and support that they need to learn at high levels. Ms. Freeman talks a lot about being able to provide equity. This is key right here, because if we're going to provide an equitable education, which means that every child gets what they need to get to be a productive citizen someday in our society, we've got to be able to provide them the additional time and support that they need. So, we're going to watch this short little clip. This video is about 2 to 3 minutes, and as we're watching, I just kind of want you to pay very close attention to the things that come across the screen, and just really think about where we are right now in terms of this sense of urgency. Want to try Jake and get it back in? What are your thoughts about that? Reactions, thoughts?
Nothing positive, all negative.
What'd you say, John?
That was Dwayne.
I
What did you say?
there was nothing positive, it was all negative.
Oh, yeah.
The dropout rate, the life expectancy, financial security. I mean, there was nothing there good to be proud of.
My thought pattern,
Dr. Williamson has,
How are you?
my thought pattern was, as I was looking at it, I was looking at how they talk about Robertson County and where we stand because we're labeled as poverty. And we fit into that frame that I saw up here because of the dropout rate, the prison and everything. So I'm like, this is where we gotta change. We gotta change that image.
My mind went to the third grade. To the third grade, that's the key.
It
It's
began.
grade 3. Can we have students on reading level by third grade? We've all heard the conversation that they determine the number of prison beds that they need by the third grade
That's what it say.
proficiency rate. Third grade, that's what went to my mind.
man,
I think my mind went to the value and importance of a great teacher, the influence of a great teacher would have on a student who is contemplating dropping out. You can drop out of school in the second grade. You know, the positivities that a great teacher has on a child and vice versa. The effect that a horrible, I mean horrible as far as not necessarily the teaching, but if there's a degradation process or problem, you know, what a teacher can do to a child. A teacher can mold or break a child.
That's right.
So I went right there is how important it is to bring kids up and the importance of staying in school and to build them as people, that they are important, regardless of where they come from, what kind of household, rich, poor, whatever.
Henry, then Randy.
What come to my mind is, we have a tendency to look at this type of information as it's presented, and this is one form here, and we have assumption, I think, a common assumption amongst us to say, I don't know if this was Robeson County, if this was North Carolina, or if this was US wide, but we have a tendency to brush it off and say, this is not us. This is always somebody else. So I think the message is, I like the ultimate message you're giving, but when we can provide, just like we did to start off, when Dr. Robert was, or Dr. Freeman was presenting the numbers, the true numbers, I think that's the impact getting attention to focus in these areas.
Randy?
My mind went to, and I know they come to school to learn, community involvement of churches, the civic groups, the business leaders. Everybody in Robeson County is gonna have to buy into this because we don't know what a child's going home to. You can sit there and teach them all day long, but if they're going home to unknown circumstances, we don't have control over that when they leave school. But if we get the buy-in from the folks that are in communities and churches and things of that sort, I think it will help us. That's another 10%, 10% you already got. So, to build off of, that's what comes to my mind.
Craig?
Think of a dropout being, okay, that person quit school. And that's it, they quit school. But that showed that person quitting school or dropping out, it affects everybody. Because if you get into monetary things, then what they end up with their life, the murder, all the other stuff that ends up happening. So one person dropping out doesn't just affect that one person. It affects everybody else. Everybody in here, with one person dropping out, somewhere we are affected. I'll go back a little bit with Dr. Williamson, and we could say third grade, but it's been noted over and over again, a child has to learn to read. If you learn to read, that takes care of most everything else in school. But now when you can't read, I mean, it's just hard to overcome that when you literally can't read. And there's one that came to my mind, and that's dealing with parents that when you give them a piece of paper to sign and they say, I need to make an X. Or you dealing with a child who's in the 9th grade and you tell them to spell their last name and they can't. And these are things I've seen happen. Or you tell a child in the 8th grade, make the letter J. I can't. I don't know how. Now, they might didn't drop out. The X probably did. But that's stuff that we deal with, but we're not the only ones. But, we need to the dropout doesn't just affect the dropout. It affects everybody that surrounds them and everybody that comes involved with that person.
Gary?
I like the title of this, a sense of urgency. And when you listen to that music and watch that video, it's almost like you end up being anxious. So, because, when you read those stats, it's almost like an emergency situation. And like, Mr. Henry was saying, is this, Robeson County numbers, or I don't know if it's nationwide or whatever, but you can almost bet that if it was just our county, I don't think it would be I don't think it would be better, because I used the analogy when the rest of the country or when North Carolina gets a cold, Robeson County gets pneumonia. So we've got our hands full. There is a sense of urgency. And I like what you were saying before about making time the variable. I actually done a presentation about this a few months ago. It's competency-based learning. So it goes back to what I was, asking last night about how many students are if, we're looking at the numbers on the low end, how many of those students on the high end are getting bored or, not being challenged enough? And with that type of approach, for the ones that's ahead, you can just let them keep right on going. And you can make time develop. And what we're after is mastery. So we've got so what is going to be I'm sure you're going to get to it. How are we going to create that culture in the schools? And I can tell you 100% in terms of the tools that we have available for our teachers and principals and school leaders, that we've got every tool that's needed to achieve this. As far as like software and that sort of thing, we've got it out there. But it's all about our culture training and getting everybody on board and rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I can tell you,
Mr. Ernie, got a question?
Yeah, my mind weren't on none of that because I had to go to the bathroom. But the point I want to make is, coming in on the tail end of it, I got a real life scenario because I see it. The approach they're taking is the proper approach because you always got to meet any student where they're at. So when you think about that, you got to think about relationship. Dr. Manuel just hit it on the head. Back before you had any kind of technology, what made Robinson County's educational system great was its teachers. And of course, the support people that put them together. I can go back and call out every one of my teachers because every one of them made an influence to me. Now, today, what I've noticed, Dr. Williams opened the door to me a while ago earlier that I've always noticed, but he just made me self-conscious of it. I can take you right now, I can take my wife anywhere in the county. Some of the little babies that's come through her line on the cafeteria, they love her to death. Now, why is that? I said, girl, you could be a governor if you wanted to, the way the students come to her. What is the difference? Relationship. So go back to what she showed us with the verbal. Once you can market, get your team together and becoming great at relationships with children. Watch this. You've got learning, which you want to be constant, and it'll never be constant because everyone has a free will. Every little baby that's born in this world has a choice to make. Now, they can choose to cooperate with you or work the opposite direction. So the only verbal you're going to get out of that child is a relationship. There's the key. If you hone in on the relationships, get that going, back to what Dr. Manuel said. So then, when you put the verbal and the choice together that the child has to make, there's your results. And it can go either direction because it's based upon the child's choice. But that relationship is a big influence, so let me show you how it influenced me. Over at Littlefield, they moved me from Magnolia, and I was a pure Trojan when I went over there. Had 2 years to complete myself. I didn't like it. I was raised up at Magnolia School. That was my school. I can tell you my internal things. So about the 12th grade, about a month or two before graduation, I walked on the front porch and I told my granddaddy, I said, Pop, I said, I'm going to quit school. And he sat right there in that chair. He didn't look at me or nothing. He said, yep. And when you do, I'll have nothing else to do with you. Now, you know what that done to my little heart? Who I looked up to, that was my pop. Still is my pop. It was like he put a knife in my heart. And that changed that thought. Even I was headstrong. I was planning on it. Nobody could talk me out of it. I was a big rebel in my mind, so I thought. Got that knife in my heart, that's Robinson County talk for stuck. When he stuck that in my heart, that changed my thoughts. And to this day, I still never forget that. A relationship, see. Not only for teachers, but parents and all of us. Relationships are so important. And that a really perfect plan. I mean, these are good ideas. But that relationship piece is the piece I think that really needs to be honed. We need to get that honed in. Just an opinion.
absolutely. And I know, Dr. Manuel, you remember using the span of control
Yes, ma'am.
years ago? And so immediately, that's what my brain was trying to wrap around, because, we hear folks say a lot, well, they came from this home, or, their mom and dad are doing this, and mom and daddies have checked out, and, we could offer up all the excuses in the world for why our children are not performing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, and research backs this up, all we're gonna have control of is what when they come to school and what we do with them, the 6-7 hours a day that we're gonna have them. That's all we got control over. And research says that an effective teacher makes the biggest impact
That's right.
on a student's achievement. So again, we can't afford to let our kids fall through the cracks, because that's what's happening. You can pick up the Robinsonian any day of the week, and you can see it, that kids are falling through the cracks. They get younger and younger.
Mr. Chairman, can I say something?
Go ahead.
By working with Hurricane Matthews, Hurricane Florence, and the disaster, one of the greatest that I've seen that we have is our students look for the teachers. As they came to the work sites to get resources with the parents, they looked for the teachers, and the teachers was there. And they was excited about seeing them. So our students love their teachers. That's one of the greatest impact that they can have, is seeing that face that they know that's gonna make a difference in their life, a positive difference. So it does make a difference. Thank you all.
But we gotta strike a good balance with that, right?
Yes.
It's not just, the lovey-dovey, feel-good kind of stuff. We still have to have high expectations, right? We still have to have the expectation that little Johnny, little Susie, and whoever else, no matter where they came from, that they're still able to, we can love them, but we're still gonna have to have that tough love, because we're gonna have to push them. And I think that's probably where, probably shouldn't say this, but I'm saying it anyway. That's probably where we are hurting our kids the most. We're loving them to death. We gotta love them, but we gotta do it, we gotta have some tough love. And y'all, it's not easy. That's hard. That's hard work. And I know I've heard it last night, we talked about it, folks are stressed, we're stressed, we got all this to do, we can't do one more thing. But y'all, if we don't do this, and we don't do it well, and we don't commit to putting in the work that it's gonna take to do what needs to be done in this district, then we need to get up and we need to move on.
I agree.
We need to go home, we need to figure out something else to do, because our boys and girls deserve better. And I'm willing to work. I don't expect to be compensated, because I believe that all of us are here because of our desire to see our kids do better. So this, if you hear anybody talking about MTSS, oh, this is all this extra stuff they're making me do, then they have missed the point altogether. Because MTSS means specifically that we are honing in and we're looking at the needs of every single child to make sure that we're bridging the gap so they can be successful. So when we think about MTSS as this system of support, see this inverted triangle. The emphasis is on tier 1, that green bar across the top, which is your core instruction. If you don't have your core, a good solid foundation, all these other pieces are not gonna matter. So we have got to make sure that our core is strong enough to meet the needs of at least 80% of our kids. The other 20% that are not, maybe just for whatever reason, they're not successful with that core just by itself. They're gonna need some additional interventions. If they're struggling in some standards, they're gonna need some intervention time. What about our AIG kids? What can you tell me about those kids? What happens to them a lot of times?
They
They're bored very easily. They're bored.
they regress.
They regress. I can tell you there's not a teacher in this district that wants a whole class of AIG kids, because they're the ones that kill them with their EBOS. Because if you're not doing what you need to do with those AIG kids, they're not growing. And they're often the kids that get left out, because, our mindset, again, going back to that bowling analogy, right? Sometimes we have a tendency to teach to the mid to low, and we leave those kids out. MTSS, if those kids need additional time and support or extension opportunities, they're gonna get it. And then you got about 5% of your student body population that are not successful just with that core alone. We've put some interventions and supports for tier 2, but they're still struggling. And they need some intense supports. That's it should be about 5% of your student body population. Yes, sir.
Well, what really hits you in the gut is that when you look at the top 2%, 5%, and maybe, I know we don't have valedictorians, salutatorians anymore, but when you look at that number of segmented number of students, percentage of students, and they go off to major universities and they struggle with the statewide or US-wide students, that really hits you in the gut because what we are looking at as being our premium product is not good enough. So that, in that aspect, we are, even though they're high performers, we still fail them because we're not challenging them to another level. But when we look at, when we look at as a whole, we got to reach every child. And the majority is not that top level students.
But what we did at the hurricanes and disaster, we set up classrooms. You know, we had the umbrellas, set up classrooms on the outside. And during the hurricane times, we had a classroom set aside where teachers could actually meet the students there that was in need. We had all that set up.
So a lot of times, and I'm gonna go around to this point, but a lot of times when folks talk about MTSS, and I don't know if you've heard this or not, but the common idea about MTSS is that it's a pathway to EC. Y'all heard that before?
Yeah.
What do I need to do to get that child tested? It is not, and never should have been. There's no intention for MTSS to be a pathway to EC. In fact, I would suggest if you have a true understanding of MTSS and the pieces that that are part of that play into this, it's a pathway to exclude children from having a disability. It's a pathway to exclude children from having a disability. But I know y'all have seen the numbers. What do we have a lot of in Robertson County?
See,
We have, and there's no way in the world that all of our children can be EC.
That's right.
They don't all have disabilities that would require that tier 3 intensive support. What they do have are gaps that need to be filled, and we got to figure out a systematic way to fill the gaps, and that's what MTSS is. So if you're thinking about tier 1 academics, that's your core. We're talking about Dr. Robert and his people, right? That pacing guide, that lesson planning. Tier 2 and tier 3 for academics. It's been a large investment in this is ClassWorks, and again, ClassWorks is going to provide a very prescriptive outline for individual children based on their individual learning needs. For behavior, tier 1, that's your PBIS stuff, the teaching of, explicit teaching of behavior. Tier 2 and tier 3 supports for behavior could include some additional like behavior plans, things like that we put in place for children based on their need, right? For social emotional learning, we're doing some universal screenings for behavior. And we're going to be able to put some intensive supports and interventions in place if they need that for tier 2 and tier 3. And we're also looking at attendance, because y'all, if they're not coming to school, what good is it going to do us? Right? And we do have a huge attendance problem. We've got a huge attendance problem, we got a huge tardy problem, we got a huge checking out early problem. And all of that means they're not getting instruction. It's eating away at that 1,025 hours. So we're going to do a little activity. Yes, sir.
Dwayne had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'd like to piggyback off what you just said right there. And what Mr. Ernie talked about a while ago was relationships. And when you were talking about that instructional time right there for kids, about what you said a while ago is, well, I'm going to what I say. I'm getting ready to say something and it's going to hit home hard. The worst thing that we have going on in our system today, as far as being able to build a relationship up, man, might have to get up and leave. Teachers have got to be in school. Teachers right now, the same old teachers that are constantly taking off on Friday, this and that and other, and it's like, man, might have to get up and leave, Dr. Williamson. But they're just, they need to be in school. And for something like this right here to be successful is you're starting off at the top and then it trickles down. But once it gets to that teacher, to be able to form a relationship, I can't have a relationship with you if it's not a repetitiveness. But if I'm in class 2 or 3 days a week, then next week I'm in 2 or 3. So it's like, You want the kids to be in school. Teachers need to be in school.
And I can see where you're coming from with that, but my brain immediately is going to is that 10%. That's all we got, that's really all we're shooting for right now, and I think we're gonna have that plus more, that 10%. And I want those people to feel so uncomfortable. I want that peer pressure to be so bad that they decide to go elsewhere. And with them, and really invest on the people who are willing to show up and do the work.
Emmanuel?
I want to support Dwayne. About 5 years ago, we had to do a report, and for that first 6 months, and I hope it's better, the teacher average was 85 point something percent, and the student average was 93%. So to show you're right about that specific year, and I challenge it to be checked out now. Of course, we've been out of school, but it historically has been higher for children than teachers.
Let's do this quick activity. I'd like for you to have a visual frame of reference for what this, what this looks like. So if you've got a green dot, stand up, please. I was nervous when I was passing those dots out.
It's just me, we leave early if we have a green dot.
I'm not the boss man. You got to see those two boss men right there. So all these folks that are standing right now, they represent 80% of the folks that are in here. These folks that are standing represent the kids that should be okay. All their needs are being met just based off of that core instruction alone. Y'all look around, looking at your neighbor. How many of our, does this reflect what our accountability results look like right now? Does it reflect what it looks like now?
No.
No.
Doesn't. So we know, obviously, there's got to be somewhat. There's got to be something, some attention paid to that core. We've got to do that to turn this around. All right, Greens, y'all have a seat. What about my yellow folks?
Help.
Anybody got a yellow dot?
Help.
I just need a little bit of help. Oh, yes. So look, these three folks right here represent 15% of the folks that are gathered here today. That 15% that's probably gonna need, now we're not cutting out their core. They're gonna need that core, plus they're gonna need some additional support. That additional support might mean that we might need to do some reteaching of some skills or standards, but it might be this AIG kid over here who needs an opportunity for extension because he got it, now he's bored, but I got to do something with her, but I got to do something with him too, right? Key thing though, you cannot take these folks from the core. It's core plus it's a layering of support, okay? All right, have a seat. Who are my red dot folks?
I need it all.
Help him.
Yes.
Help him.
Like this.
He represents the 5% of the kids
Wow.
that need core. He needs core. You can't take him out of that core, right? If we take him out of core and we just spend all our time in remediation, what happens? He gets further and further behind because he's not getting grade level content. He's got to have core. He's got to have those additional supports in place. But that's not enough. He needs a little bit more. So what are we going to do? We're going to give him some very intensive, very targeted support. We're looking at how many times a week am I meeting with Mr. Terry?
Okay.
How many times a week? Is it a one-on-one? Is it like 2-and-1? And then what does that look like in the classroom? And I'll tell you, for ClassWorks, any child that is showing deficits right now in reading and math that are tier 2 or tier 3, they're getting that with ClassWorks. Daily, they're getting work with ClassWorks. And ClassWorks has identified those basic skills that Mr. Terry might need to fill those gaps so that he's able to be successful in tier 1. Now, tier 1 is who? Thank you, Mr. Terry. Tier 1 includes all students. Everybody in here is tier 1. We are all tier 1 right now. So if you're getting phone calls and people don't understand, what's this language about tiers 1, tiers 2, and you don't have to be here to here to here. It's not linear. It's very fluid. And again, I like to think of it as it's layering support, whether that's academic, behavioral, social emotional learning, or attendance.
You left me out. I have no number. I'm a dropout.
You leave your,
I'm a dropout. I don't even fit in that fact.
you didn't get a dot.
No.
But she's testing you for EC, so.
Just bring that up though as part of the project.
You withdrew yesterday.
That's what I'm saying. Where am I into the equation?
You would have been agreeing on our numbers.
Okay.
Does that make you feel better? Okay.
Correct.
Late arrival.
Henry.
All right,
But that is reality.
it is, absolutely. And we're talking about that shift again. We've got to make that shift with our teachers, with anybody that's on those campuses. We've got to make sure that they are understanding we are making a shift. They can go with us or they can go home, but we are making the shift from I know I taught that. I know I taught that. I don't want to hear that anymore. What I want to hear is, what did my students learn? And if they didn't learn it, what do I need to do differently? Because it's the adults. It's the adults that are going to have to change their behavior if our kids are going to learn. There's no more fault on the kids. We can't fault them for where they're coming from, their family history. We can't do that anymore. We have to carry that load and the burden. It's our responsibility.
How do we?
See, I know y'all gonna get to it. So when you look at all of this, which is powerful, so then the assessment that we use is critical, right?
Absolutely.
That's critical, because if we use one size assessment fits all, we're never gonna have the correct thing. So I plant that seed as we move to think about that. For some percentage of kids, it's hands-on. With that live project that we need, on and on and on and on. So I just plant that as we move forward. The assessment that we use is just so critical, and it's not a one-size-fits-all.
That's right.
And that common formative assessment piece coming very regularly.
What is the, excuse me,
Go ahead.
what is the retention tool to make sure, just like what this chart's saying, is it repetitive teaching? Or is it dynamics of teaching? What is the major tool to make this not happen?
To make,
And I know I taught the material. Somebody missed something somewhere. And I think there's a statistical number, saying 10% of that 100% that you heard. And there's going to be a certain percentage of, I think I know. I don't know what I don't know. That type of terminology.
and I think it goes back to delivering that instruction and then having a way to assess it. And we're not assessing one time at the end of the year, but we're doing multiple, common formative assessments, those shorter assessments at the end of a week or the end of every 2 weeks, dictated really kind of by the pacing guy, so that we're keeping up with all of these students, what they're mastering, what they need some additional time with. And that shifts, and I want to use Mr. Terry's word from last night, and he talked about, well, we've got to be dynamic, I think is the word that he used. That's what's got to happen. We've got to stop using instructional practices that we were comfortable with, just because that's the way I've always done it, and it was successful for some kids, and, I'm sorry, it just wasn't for the others. We're going to have to do things differently, research-based practices. Research-based practices. And again, taking my feelings out of, well, I did it, they should have got it, taking my feelings out of it and focusing, gosh, they didn't get it, what do I need to do differently?
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it, man.
Getting back to what you're saying, and Mr. Brewer saying, another way to really, really assess if a child knows how to do something is they demonstrate themselves what you've taught. Like say, for example, if I'm up teaching a child how, this is just a practical thing, how to change a tire. And then that child actually changes that tire for me. The child knows it for life.
Hands-on piece.
So, yeah, the demonstration of what you've taught, and that tire is oversimplification, but there are other models that when teachers teach, and then that child, and another thing that each one teach one. Let's say, for example, you're teaching something, and then I know it so well that I can teach Craig what you taught me. That's another way of practicality. Kids actually, you know that that child knows it, if he knows it well enough to teach someone else.
Put them on the spot.
So, just in a nutshell, very quickly, well, what is MTSS and what does that look like in the public schools of Robeson County? MTSS is just a little umbrella. It's the framework. It's what we're referring to all of these supports and interventions that are going to come into play. So we're talking about the PBIS, when we're talking about explicitly teaching behavior, the social emotional learning. We've got second steps and I think some things that Philip's going to cover with you. The professional learning communities, which is the has to happen. This has to happen on school campuses. Those PLCs are going to be the problem-solving teams. They're going to address all of these things that are going on with our kids every day. So all of those pieces fall under MTSS. And I think that's Mr. Phillip.
I loved it. Good job.
I want to be like you when I get younger.
I want to be in her classroom.
All right,
Her classroom.
before,
Randy's got a question. Randy's got a question.
not a question,
Well, that's fine.
take 5 before he starts.
Huh?
Take 5.
Yeah, you can take 5, yeah. Take a 5-minute recess.
Yeah.
That's fine.
What time is it, Craig?
Got a quorum?
Go on.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Superintendent Williams, Board,
Good morning.
Central Office staff, and those listening. I'm Phil Foxton, I'm the MTSS coordinator for the Public Schools of Robinson County. I'm glad to be with you this morning and have the opportunity to share the work that we've been doing. What you see up here is the MTSS guidebook. This is inside your notebook. Dr. Bullitt has spent a few minutes talking about the plan we have in place and how MTSS is our framework for district improvement. Some of the key features found within inside the guidebook are the composure of our district MTSS team. We have the school level teams as well. And then Mr. Brewer talked about going into a school the other day, and he saw a group of teachers working together. That is a professional learning community. That was a group of professional educators coming together to discuss the needs of their children. That might not have been just about academics. It could have been about the social emotional learning component. It could have been about academics, could have been about attendance, could have also been about behavior. Whatever barriers that particular child might have in place, those are the discussions that need to take place to ensure that we're addressing those needs and meeting the students where they are. Within that guidebook that you have in your booklet, there's a framework and it shows a flow chart for our problem solving process. Also discusses the various data points and data sources that we utilize to make decisions on our campuses. Examples of attendance, EOG scores, DIBELS, Classworks Universal Screener, and the behavior risk screener that I'll spend a few minutes talking about shortly. There are the data decision rules, the rules that those PLC teams use to determine what strategic interventions we put in place for the students that we observe deficiencies. Also, the layers of support that they will receive in Tier 1, 2, and 3, also called the core, supplemental instruction, and then intensive instruction based on need. All the templates and forms are hyperlinked. So online, we have this a version of this booklet online so that the schools have access to it. It's on the homepage and each school page. They'll be able to go in and click on those links and use this guidebook as a tool, as a resource, as an asset to ensure that they're meeting the goals that we have in place. Also, we have a standard treatment protocol. If a student is displaying X, we prescribe Y, and that's based on the protocols found within the guidebook. We've been talking a lot about social emotional learning and determining baselines. We're utilizing Classworks to determine our academic baselines, but what do we use to determine our behavioral baseline? We're going to implement what is a student risk screener. For us, the student risk screener is a universal and systematic screening process designing to make us aware of those internalizing and externalizing behaviors that students experience every day. Why do we need to administer this? It helps us understand and plan positively ways to impact our students before they become a problem. So this is preventative instead of reactive. We utilize this screener 3 times a year, beginning of the year in October, once the staff has had an opportunity to get familiar with their students and build those relationships we know that are so critical. Once again in December, the middle of the year, and then at the end of the year before the testing process starts in April. The first screener I'll talk about is the comprehensive integrated 3-tiered support, and that's a CI3T. It's for all of our students pre-K through 12th grade. There's a radar training that has been completed with our school counselors, and they're going to share that process with their teachers. They'll spend a couple minutes assessing their students through this screening. We have 2 schools that are participating in the DESA. They're the DeVoe Student Strengths Assessment, and that's a pilot for 2 schools. It's the same, it's very similar to the CIT3, except it's an online format. And we're piloting that with Tanglewood and Rex Runner to kind of see if we like that version instead. And if those students are considered low, moderate, or high risk, then you would have those interventions put in place based on what's found within our district mental health plan. This is an example of what one of the screeners looks like. Each teacher who has became familiar with that student, built those relationships over the first 4 weeks or so of school, will then look at the observable behaviors. Some examples are stealing, lying, aggressive behavior. Those are the external behaviors that you actually see or that get displayed by those students. Some internal ones could be anxiety. Maybe that student's lonely. Maybe they're sad. Those are behaviors that don't necessarily get expressed, but you need to make sure that you are familiar with those as well. We have the cut scores here at the bottom. For externalizing, 0 to 3 will be a low-risk student. So the core alone will be sufficient for those students. We have students that are experiencing a level 4 to 8, which will be a moderate risk. We will put a secondary intervention in place, or tier 2 intervention, to support those children with their needs. Maybe reaching out to the school counselors for some assistance as well. And then a student who is at the highest risk, receiving a 9 through 21 on that screener, would potentially also receive the core. They would receive those secondary interventions. Maybe we may also reach outside the district for support when all of our resources have been exhausted. So this is a tool that we utilize within our district to get a gauge for how our students are going to perform behaviorally as well. This is for the high school. We have this for pre-K, middle and high, and the elementary schools. So we have this screener for all 3 grade levels to ensure that we cover all of our bases. Because every student within our district is part of our MTSS framework, pre-K all the way through 12th grade. What do we build our support system on? We have second step. Second step is built on the 5 core competencies of cases. We look at some of these skills, and they're called life skills, and we want to make sure students are self-aware, they're able to manage the decisions that they make, they're making responsible decisions, building those strong relationship skills, and also being socially aware. We have a lot of students that make poor choices, and those poor choices intend to turn into underperforming in the classroom. And what is the second step program? We know that it's research-based. It teaches our students how to regulate themselves in order to have success in school. Those valuable life skills that they learn through this program builds upon their character and allows them an opportunity to make better choices. Coming to class on time, working diligently, paying attention to the teacher. These are all life skills that are going to help make a difference in that student's success. This second step program also has a differentiation component built in between grade levels to reflect the child's development. It has interactive teaching strategies that are utilized by the teachers and the counselors to ensure these skills are being effectively taught. And it's centered around the best practices for developing and reinforcing those skills, so the students have all the tools they need to be successful. What this looks like in a school setting, we have these weekly lessons and daily practices for kindergarten through 1st grade. They'll receive approximately 15 to 20 minutes per week, depending on their need. And it can total as much as 7 to 9 minutes daily. For the 2 through 5, 2nd through 5th grade, we have approximately 25 to 30 minutes per week, and they're receiving those services 7 to 10 minutes per day through the second step program. And then lastly, the middle school age students receive 25 to 30 minutes per week, and as much as 10 to 15 minutes per day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Oh, 1 minute.
Sir.
I'm got a question. I'm gonna use myself as a scenario. I'm a potential dropout. You're taking, just say boy. The teachers, I'm one student in this class and I'm taking the assessment. I'm boy at this time. Now I get the MOI in December. Now, the interaction that this system has developed for me through this screening process, how is it monitored for improvement or declination, I should say?
We're collecting data through a Google form, so that data comes to us here at the central office, and then we'll look at that data and determine what supports we need to put in place. So for example, for you, you said that you were bored. If we're seeing that data, then we may have to look at your attendance. We have to look at your academic performance. And if you're excelling and then you're bored because the work is too easy, we may have to focus on some extension activities that challenge you and keep you engaged so that you're no longer bored. And bored students oftentimes transition into behavioral problems.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
So at the end of the day, it moves us away from our thing that we automatically overload the assessment system. Powerful tool, not again to the core. that because the kids understand what's being taught. All of the behavior at the early age, because they don't want you to know that they don't know.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly right.
Behavior is an attempt to mask a deficiency.
Right.
So I can't read, I can't add, so I cut up in your class to ensure you don't know, because you focus on my behavior and not the fact that I have a deficiency as far as reading and math.
Now, what if I'm sorry, follow up. What if I transfer? From what I'm seeing with this chart, a teacher can have 25 students or whatever that page will hold, documented on one page. Now, what's following me through the school system process?
We have one for each school. So if you transition from Carroll Middle and you go over to Lumberton Junior, they'll have a similar assessment that'll be completed by those teachers once they've gotten acclimated to that student. You can't complete that screener unless you are familiar with the student and you've had opportunity to observe those behaviors. So this screener is based on observable behaviors that you've seen over time because you've had the experience with that particular child.
Ray's got a question.
When you said the masking of behaviors, they don't want you to know they can't read. I can see the student right now. I can see a student right now that was a behavior problem. I mean, serious behavior problem. Had some talks and whatever, and he was one of the best students on campus for X amount of time. All of a sudden, went back downhill, went back the other way. Got in, had a conversation. Why, what's going on? What happened? Mr. Craig, my buddies, they started picking at me, telling me I was a nerd.
Right.
I was doing good stuff, and his behavior reverted back. And he was smart, but now that can happen with kids, and it happens a lot with children. Exactly what you were saying.
And to that point, that's the reason it's important to have that screening throughout the year multiple times because of those shifts in what the child experienced. So if we do that screening once and never looked at it again, we may miss that particular child
Right.
who became a behavioral issue later on, which is why we screen multiple times.
Thank you.
Good job.
So this morning, I wanted to kind of continue the conversation that Tara and Philip started about how do we look at the whole child? So we've talked about the behaviors, we've talked about attendance, we've talked about all those different pieces, but we also need to talk about the academics. Because as we know, that's the piece we've been talking about since the beginning of last night. So what we've looked at this year is that we've implemented or started implementing ClassWorks. So ClassWorks is used for multiple purposes. ClassWorks is our universal screener to help us identify students at risk because we can't wait till later. So it assesses those skills necessary to be successful. It also is a tier 2 and tier 3 support. So that's where it adds those additional layers and provides individual learning plans or learning paths for each child. So that could be in advancing a child that's AIG, but it can also offer those layers where there's gaps for that child. So it does both pieces. It is based on that initial assessment they take. However, throughout that process, they also progress monitor. So every 2 weeks, they take an assessment online that shows, are those students progressing the way they should, or is there somebody that needs to intervene? Because we know, just like anything else, it can't be a tool by itself. Teachers have to be part of that process. So that entails teachers looking at those data points to make a decision. What changes do I need to make? How do I look at that data and pull additional resources into my classroom to support those students? So when we also think about it, there's additional layers that we're adding with ClassWorks as far as in tier 1 or core instruction. So what we've asked ClassWorks to do is to work with together with the curriculum department. And so in the pacing guides, they've added additional resources that teachers can use from ClassWorks to help with core instruction, to fill in additional gaps that may be existing. Another piece that Tara mentioned, thinking about formative assessment, how do we know how students are progressing throughout the year, not just one point in time? Because we take check-ins, but that's once in 9 weeks. That's a long time to wait to find out something has happened. So what we're working together now with the curriculum department is we're creating formative assessments that will be given every couple weeks to say, based on what you've taught these last couple weeks, where are the students? So that we can quickly intervene and make changes that are necessary. But that's on core instruction. So with core instruction assessment, those quick formative assessments will be given every few weeks. But then we also have the progress monitoring for individual students on their individual paths. So this tool will allow us to have multiple ways of looking what the students' needs are as far as on grade level, but also thinking about those skill gaps or those areas that we're trying to advance students in. So part of that is, of course, looking at professional development. So will you one further? What we have in your book is actually a list of professional development dates for the entire year that teachers will participate in throughout the year. And I'll go through this in a second, but those professional development days include 1 day a month for about an hour and 15 minutes of professional development on one piece of classwork. So every month we're adding a different layer. How to first start your actual core instruction, how to give the universal screener, how to progress monitor, how to look at the data. So different pieces every month. In addition, we've set up that every month we have 1 day that teachers can go online during the whole day and just pop in with classworks and ask any questions they have. Because we know as they use the tool, more and more questions arise. So this is their opportunity just to go in and a live person is there to ask questions. The additional layer we have, because we know, like we talked about instructional leadership, principals need to know all that information themselves. So once a month, Classworks also meets with schools to discuss as far as a leadership team, thinking about AAP, principal, and academic coach, because we talked about that communication loop that needs to happen. All three of them join a webinar and learn another piece about Classworks, how to look at their data, how to look at tier 1, how to look at tier 2, so that they have that same understanding as their teachers will. In that also, the district office has a session once a month with Classworks to do that same thing. So we're all hearing it based on the level where we are as far as Classworks and the support. And so also on those Saturdays, I asked everybody from central office that's involved in curriculum and student services and all principals, APs, and academic coaches to be part of those Saturday sessions. Because like we talked about, we want one mission, one goal, and the same communication coming from everybody. So it's key that all of us are in all those sessions so that we're not speaking different languages when we talk about what does Classworks look like, sound like in a classroom. So to help actually look at what does it look like in a classroom, we've developed this chart. And so what you'll see up here at the top is about the classroom block. So this is about core instruction. What does the daily piece look like as far as utilizing Classworks in the classroom? So what you'll notice at the top, it says total 30 minutes daily. So that is made up of multiple things, not just the online component. So students, as far as core instruction, are on online 30 minutes actually for core, for reading and for math. So 30 minutes reading, 30 minutes math, but it's split between all 5 days. In addition, they're using resources from Classworks and pulling those in during core instruction to help teach the standards. And also doing small group instruction based on the data they're seeing that's coming out of Classworks. So that all builds in during that regular time every day. Then what we've asked schools to do is every school is supposed to have an intervention block set aside to help support those additional layers when we think about tier 2 supports and tier 3 supports. So what you'll see at the bottom for tier 2, those students, in addition to the 30 minutes during core instruction, get an additional 60 minutes online for tier 2 every week in reading and math. If they need tier 3 supports, it's 75 minutes. And like we said, each of these paths is based on the individual student's needs. So everybody's doing something different based on what they need. And so you'll see down there, that does not just mean that the student gets online and spends all day online by themselves. This also means that this time the teacher pulls that data, and if I need some support, they're going to pull me during those times and use Classworks resources to help me fill in those additional gaps. So I wanted to show you what our universal screener results really look like, and I did put them in there because we're not complete until Friday, because that was the deadline. So will you go to the next slide? So this is our language arts results, and that's not on your slide because this was new data as of Friday. So what you'll see up here, you'll see the red, yellow, green, and blue. So remember, this is skills-based for risk, to say these are students, if we do nothing, or if we just provide basic support, this is where they'll end up at the end of the year. So if we do 1 year of good core instruction, they'll be in the same place at the end of the year. Okay? So the red is our tier 3. The yellow is tier 2. And now I want to caution everybody about the green. Green is not good. Green means watch. Blue means on grade level. So those green students, depending on what we do, can either end up on grade level or can end up on yellow or red. So what it basically tells us is that 50% of our students have additional needs in language arts. So either off grade level or just very close to being on grade level. So if you think of this, it kind of matches the iReady data we shared this summer, where we had about 50% of our students one or more years behind. So if you'll go to math. So math looks a little, that kind of reflects our results when you think about EOG earlier that Dr. Roberts shared. We have a larger number of red and a larger number of yellow and a larger number of green. So it's almost 60% on here of students that we have some concerns about if we don't do anything, that we'll see these results at the end of the year. Any questions about this before I show you what ClassWorks can actually do?
I got a question. I'm concerned about, or a question that comes to my mind is the facilitator. Is this part, and I realize this ClassWorks, is this spearheaded, led by the teacher? And if so, how are we getting the core curriculum that we identified, just like math? How are we getting those principles across to lead from level 1 to level 2? And I understand this right here consists of like group intervention and all these other techniques. My concern is the teacher being overwhelmed with just too much.
Well, the nice thing about ClassWorks, it really does provide the resources necessary to teach as far as when you're thinking about the tiered support, in addition to what's in the pacing guide for that core instruction. So when you layer those different pieces together, you have the resources available that you need. When you log into ClassWorks, like I said, the path as far as intervention is decided by the program. The teacher does not have to make any decisions. When you think about what do I do with Philip and what do I do with Jennifer, or what I do with Mr. Craig, what do I do doesn't have to be decided by me alone, because I may not be that expert. Because like we talked about, we need to continue working on professional development when we think about reading research and science of reading, because there's still some gaps in those pieces. So in here, the nice thing about this program, it does help them decide what the path is. So it automatically turns it on once they take that universal screener. Now, as the teacher looks at the data and as we help them interpret that data, they can make some additional decisions to add additional resources, additional pieces to it. In addition to it, even the progress monitoring, they hit a switch, it turns it on, and it does it automatically for them every 2 weeks. So a lot of things in ClassWorks is automated so that they don't have to make those decisions on their own. Of course, like we said, the important piece is also then them learning how to use that data. So that's why that professional development is coming in, so that we can help them build their capacity and understanding what does that mean if a student's struggling in a certain area, and how can I pull additional resources from ClassWorks. But it's laid out for them. They can literally go in there and they have resources they can pull and use for small group.
So this take away a lot of the paperwork that they used to do in time past?
So as far as progress monitoring stuff, they used to have to graph that and
Right.
everything. This creates, and I'll show you in a minute what it does, but it actually creates the graphs for them. It shows if the students are on path to make it where they need to, or if they need to think about changing that intervention. So as Tara spoke about earlier, what do I do if this child's not getting it? So do they need more time, less time, a different group? So it kind of helps them make that decision because it graphs that data for them so they can see what path that child's on. Any other questions? So let's take a look what ClassWorks offers as a whole, so you can grasp a greater understanding of how it's used.
For nearly 2 decades, ClassWorks has been helping to achieve equity in education around the country. And just as our classrooms have changed in the last 20 years, so too has the way that we support them. Whether you're a former, current, or future user, here are 8 things you might not know about Classworks. When it comes to putting data to work, Classworks integrates with more assessments than any other intervention platform. Each student's learning progression is adaptive, based on their own test results. More assessment integrations means we're closing more gaps than anyone else, and we've got the data to prove it. In recent studies, students who used Classworks for as little as 12 minutes per week showed 92% growth between testing windows. The Classworks learning progression lays out skills in the most teachable order for students, regardless of the domain. This ensures that students have the necessary foundational skills before tackling more complex lessons, like learning multiplication and perimeter before learning to calculate area. This is not only a more effective way to close gaps, but also makes learning more enjoyable for the student. Additionally, the Classworks learning progression is organized to prioritize the skills that'll appear later on high-stakes tests. While assessment data will definitely optimize the student learning experience, you don't have to wait until test day to get to work. Because Classworks now has its own learning progression, when students log in at the beginning of the year, they already have activities waiting for them. After the test data is available, the learning progression is modified. This means students are always working on relevant instruction. Classworks progress monitoring is an easy and essential way for teachers to gauge the overall effectiveness of students' interventions. Turning on progress monitoring for students is as easy as selecting the On button. Students automatically receive a probe each week at the level you've indicated, and results automatically inform the student's learning path. You've also got insights into skill-specific data each week, and of course, a place to document any changes to student performance in detail. Classworks has introduced tools to help you integrate social and emotional learning into students' academic interventions. Students can take ownership of their learning by using the My Scores page to track weekly and monthly time on task and mastery goals. Students gain a variety of badges and characters by passing milestones as they work in Classworks. Plus, built-in digital success notebooks help students document their progress as they work towards their own goals. These resources make perfect talking points when conferencing with your students. Teachers can also use the Observations tab to record behavioral and academic observations for students. For years, districts have loved our universal screener for prescribing learning paths to students. But did you know that there is an abundance of data available after students have tested? The Classworks Universal Screener is validated by the National Center on Intensive Intervention and can be used to track growth, group students by skill level, provide RTI recommendations, and also rank students by percentile and tier. The Universal Screener is available to all customers and only takes about 30 minutes to complete. We all like freshening up our appearance every so often, and Classworks is no different. We've streamlined the navigation in Classworks so that teachers can easily view test data, each student's learning progression, and progress monitoring windows, and quickly make adjustments. Imagine if your learning management system was already filled with thousands of high-quality lessons for students. That would save a lot of time for teachers, right? Classworks was designed with the ability to link with your learning management system, including Google Classroom. Teachers can search and assign from over 7,000 standards-based math, ELA, and reading activities from right inside of their LMS, and record scores directly into their gradebook. With so many schools using Google Classroom for virtual learning, being able to easily add Classworks activities has been a huge weight off teachers' shoulders. Classworks is always evolving to best meet your needs. And this year especially, you want an all-in-one online learning solution that's proven to quickly assess and address learning gaps, support special education, and provide high-quality Tier 1 lessons for your learning management system. Classworks is ready to set you up for success this year.
At the beginning, they mentioned the integration. One thing they did share with us that it will integrate with the check-ins. So if we give them the check-in data, it will put that also in there so it can help also manage that path. So if that data shows something different than what just the universal screener progress monitoring tools are showing, it helps also develop additional paths to help address those areas on the check-ins. So any questions about Classworks and the data and how we're going to use it?
Is this tool, did it come integrated with the standards already?
There's, so,
Right, I mean,
so yes, there, so not, there's two pieces. There's skills pieces when we think of tier 2 and tier 3, and then there are standards pieces. So if a teacher wants to search something for standard, they can actually search by standard and find resources. That's where some of those additional resources that are embedded in our pacing guide are in there, but it also allows us to create formative assessments in here. So this is a tool that the district's going to use to develop some formative assessments for reading and math so that we have district-wide formative assessments based on a pacing guide.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that, are those the core assessments you were talking about a few minutes ago that the district's developing? Okay, so that's something that's been in-house, outside of the typical benchmarks and everything?
Right, so that we have additional pieces of data. Like we said, check-ins is just not enough. That's one piece of data every 9 weeks. We need to know how things are going on throughout in the district. And that also tells us how do we need to change those things in core instruction as a district. So if something's not working, what do we need to do as a district, not just individual schools?
And all of those assessments are going to be conducted through this classwork system?
Through the classwork
Okay.
system.
Be able to run data district-wide on, yep.
And that was one of the beauties of this, is that we can have that district-wide data and say what's happening in real time on a regular basis, not just waiting for a check-in to appear.
And when we'll start the second 9 weeks?
The second 9 weeks, we're going to start with those formative assessments. We're working on it right now. Any other questions about?
That's what I was talking with Dr. Bullitt a few minutes ago about is Canvas has something called Mastery Paths. So this is something similar to Mastery Paths, which is essentially, is it something you've used it before? It comes, it's integrated with Canvas. It's not like an external purchase or anything. So you can create small assessments and route students based on their performance. So if they score this score, it routes them back to this content, you know. And if they master the content, then they can progress to the next lesson. So it's kind of one of those tools that makes time the variable and mastery the goal.
So it sounds really similar to what Classworks is doing, is sort of based on their need. It's either going to progress them further, so those AIG students are going to move up, and our other students are going to get additional support if they need it. I do want to mention, so with Classworks, we gave the universal screener to K-10. And we also did all of our special education students at the high school, so that we can continue filling in those gaps. Additional students were, if a principal at the high school called me and said, I need this student to be assessed just to see if there's some additional areas of concern or if I can get some additional support, they've also tested those. So everybody K-10 right now has taken that universal screening.
Go ahead, Terry, you had the floor.
One more thing. Have we created key performance indicators or KPIs, or are we going to wait on our baseline data to set those sorts of goals?
We've got to wait for the baseline data to set. Any other questions?
Good.
Okay. So as we spoke before, Ms. Freeman spoke about before, so you have all these different pieces, but then we need additional supports and people to help with all those different pieces when you think about MTSS and supporting all the needs in the whole child. So as a result, as we spoke about, interventionists are being hired for every K-2 school. So we're looking currently, we have 4 so far, we're looking for some more. And then they're going to use the letter lane intervention to help fill in those phonics and phonemic awareness gaps. In addition, as we spoke before, in order to help support small group instruction, instructional assistants are being added. And then also nurse and nurse extenders, like we talked about. When you think about MTSS, you have to think about the health needs too, if you're looking at the whole child. So those are added into this piece. And then of course, the last piece are social workers, which we've spoken about when we think about the mental health needs and the social emotional needs in a child. So moving forward, when we think about professional capacity and thinking about that CNA, how do we build everybody's capacity in those areas? So what we had in ESSER funding, if you'll see, we'll go through this first. You'll see that we had stipends for dual teachers. So you think about those stipends when our teachers that are doing the online and the face-to-face, there's a stipend built into ESSER 3 that pays that out of here. In addition, we have stipends for principals and AP. This will be part of that leadership. So you think about the relay and work that we're doing with the Leadership Academy. We're also going to do an AP Academy. And so they'll receive a stipend to be part of those pieces to put those things in place in their schools. In addition, you'll see Science of Reading stipend. This stipend is part of what we're using to help pay those teachers coming on Saturdays to support classworks, because that's part of what you need as far as Science of Reading. We need good universal screening and data to help support us. Then we have TAPP for reading. What we're also going to look at is instructional. We want those teacher assistant be instructional assistants. And so what we want to do is provide them professional development in reading also, so they can more effectively help in the classroom. And of course, then the last piece is academic coaches. So this is being paid through here for the next 3 years. And currently we have 28. We're looking for one more. So almost every school has their own. One schools can continue splitting until we find one more academic coach. And then on the top, we do have that stipend that was paid to everybody this year out of ESSER 2. Any questions about that before I actually get into academic coaches?
Craig?
I don't think it's related as much to this, but it's just something I seen the other day. You know, we're covering classes at every school because of teachers shortages and what have you. Is there any possibility, and I'm not looking at that, we always have to cover classes, you always do that. But if we got a teacher out for COVID, is there any possibility or thought, maybe down the road, that we could pay a stipend if we got teachers on campus covering COVID-related, our teachers being out? Now, I know if our teachers are at home and they got COVID and they're able to teach, they teach virtually. And if that, you know, that's where we're at. But that's just a thought, since we was talking about here, that something maybe could be looked at if they're out for the COVID purpose, that, and we brought in a teacher on campus to cover that class during their planning, that they could be compensated, and I'm saying COVID reasons only. So just being short a teacher and having to cover classes, that's always went on. We've always had to do that. But that's just a thought at that moment.
You got a comment? Go ahead.
Well, of course, I can't say that that's not something we could do, but currently, we don't get a report to say when that happens, because like you said, it's just a coverage. So as of right now, there's nothing that we get here at the district level to say when a teacher is covering. And I don't know feasibly what kind of work will be involved in maintaining some kind of, getting that information. I mean, it's something we can certainly look into, but that is one of the barriers to that, is that it's not something that's currently captured. So we couldn't really put a budget amount to it, but we can certainly investigate it.
Yeah, from the standpoint, if I might, like, I know last year we had a couple of teachers, because of situations, they were out for 28 days straight. We're having to take care of somebody COVID, and then they had to stay out for their quarantine. So they missed school 28 days. Now, in that case, they were not sick to the point they couldn't teach. But again, I'm gonna go back to what we say, having that teacher actually in that classroom, and it would, I know, take some other funds and being able to look at and get some reports. And it's just something I'm saying that we could look at. Not necessarily maybe do right now, but at least look at it.
Dr. Williams?
We've had conversations, tracking part of that would be a challenge. So that's why we kind of moved and asked the question, where will we be able to stipend this year like we did last year, half in December and half in May. That's a possibility. That way, we said that we will be covered. So that's what we actually did. I get into now, at this point, there's a possibility we can, correct?
It's a possibility that we're exploring. It's not a possibility yet, not ready to draw, but we are.
She won't ever answer.
Good money.
Go ahead, Wynn.
So I wanted to give a little more detail about what the academic coaches have been doing and what their role is. So if you can move forward. So like we talked about before, the academic coach's role is to support the teachers so that we can support student achievement. So if you'll move. So of course, this means these are all 10-month employees that are directly evaluated by the teacher. The only piece that I provide is
sharing the documentation that they do so that that can be part of the evaluation process. Each one is assigned to a school and they follow that regular school schedule. They actually right now are participating in professional development every week. So you've probably heard about academic coaches coming down here on a weekly basis. As we talked about, these first 90 days are very important. So there's a lot of professional development being put forth to the academic coaches, including such things as keys to literacy. So for the next month, they're going to become trainers in those key literacy strategies so that they can use those in the classroom with the teachers and teach them how to use those strategies. They're also going to go through some training with math and practice, because as we talked about, math is a high need area, and that's instructional practices that really support math in the classroom. In addition, we're going through coaching PD with them. What does coaching look like? How do you ask good questions? How do you coach a student through the teacher through the process, but also how do you mentor? So they're also going through the mentor PD right now through HR so that they have that background and what does mentoring look like. In addition, what we have them doing is they're getting a lot of the same professional development the principals are, because like we said, we want everybody speaking the same language. So they've been trained on PLCs and MTSS. They've been trained on how to look at the different sources of data like Amplify that has come out. We've done just this past Friday, a lot of training on lesson design and pacing, which the principals will also hear on Wednesday. So like we said, what we're trying to do is to ensure they have a well-rounded understanding of all the pieces that we're putting in place in the district, and so that the principals and academic coaches speak the same language, because we don't want different messages coming out from the coaches than what the principals are sharing as an instructional leader. So we have sort of put many different things in place as far as professional development all through December, so that the main focus is getting that deep understanding of the standards, of the pacing, of the resources, how to use the technology. For example, we've worked some on the Canvas piece, how to use the digital tools such as Nearpod, because we want them to have that understanding of what can they do and how can they help support teachers in the classroom to be successful and work with their students. What I'm going to ask you, so what I've done, is they actually submit a Google form every single day, every single time they do something with a teacher. So right now I have almost 2,000 logs of what they've been doing over the past month. And what this shows is just their work with the teachers. So what you'll notice, of course, a lot of time is spent with teacher support, because at the beginning of the year, they're mostly working with those beginning of the year teachers or beginning teachers, because they need a lot of additional support in what they do in the classroom, how to set it up, how to manage their classroom, all those different things. So you also see working with data. So just how do you look at the data, or how do you actually give certain assessments? They're also participating in supporting professional learning communities, modeling lessons, doing observations and feedback. They're having teacher meetings based on what their individual needs are, because what we've asked them to do is every teacher they're supporting, they've been identifying focus teachers. They're writing individual plans of what they're going to do with that teacher. So right now they're working on setting goals with each one of those teachers, just like we do with students. So think about how are you going to get to what you need to get to. So if it's on lesson design, if it's on small group instruction, they're focusing on what that teacher's needs are. In addition, of course, they've started some professional development, but a lot of that comes through PLCs and those pieces. Any question about what they're currently doing in the school?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment, and maybe it's a concern. So if I'm a mentor, coach, and I see 6 teachers in one day, I have to submit 6 forms to you?
It's very basic. It's just a basic log to say, it takes less than a minute. It literally is the date, time, what did you work on, and what was the focus. So it's just to quickly assess what you're doing. And it literally is a click of those things. So it literally takes about a minute to complete that form. And so I have actually suggested they do it as they walk out with that. But yes, they do, because we need that documentation as far as federal guidelines to submit to say this is the work we're doing. So we have certain documentation we must maintain because they're being paid out of ESSER. And so they do maintain those.
But I guess my thing is, wouldn't that be more feasible for them to put at the end of the day on one form?
Not if we're going to collect the data and look at how each school is doing it.
I mean, if they're assigned to one school, I'm Lindy Mangan, I'm the coach, and that day I did 6 teachers, and there's a daily form, wouldn't it be more logical for me to do it at the end of the day? I'm asking now, this
Well,
is
they get a
me.
choice to do it at the end of the day or throughout. I just tell them whatever works best for them.
Oh,
Some
okay.
of them have said it's easier, and I've said it was easier. Honestly, when I finish with that person, I put quickly down what I've done, and so that I submit it and I get my form back to say, this is what I've.
Let me tell you where I'm coming from. It appears that if they're doing it in the presence of the teacher, or as they're walking out, it appears that they've evaluated the teacher. And they don't need that perception. They're doing it in front of the teacher. You see what I'm saying?
Well, and the plan, when you think about with the plan, they actually write the plans with the teacher. So that it's very transparent as far as that. There's no evaluation. They know exactly what they're working on together with that teacher. So they develop the goals together with that teacher. They're just saying, this is where we are with that goal. The same thing they talk about literally in the meeting. And I understand as far as the concern about the evaluation, but we've told them, and we've told all the principals they cannot be part of the evaluation process, and that's confidential between them and the actual teacher. So the names don't go even on that form of the teacher, so that it's confidential and it's not shared with even myself. That is in their notes only.
So if the names, I guess I'm confused. If the names do not go on the form,
On this,
you said, Mr., I'm sorry.
Fine, go ahead.
If the names do not go on the form, and you're saying you need it for evaluation,
no,
how,
it's not for evaluation.
not evaluation for the money, evidence or whatever?
Well, the state and the federal government doesn't need names. They need to know what work they're doing. They keep their own notes on what they do with each individual teacher separate.
Okay.
So that's separate piece, so that that's not shared with everybody. We don't want them to break that confidentiality with that teacher and to build that relationship so they can have a good working relationship on those tools and things that they're working on.
But it's not only for purposes of federal guidance. We don't want to mislead you on that. Part of the work for the academic coach is we're looking at what are the big nuggets that keep surfacing. Where are the areas that we need to strengthen our focus? What do we need to continuously work on? It also yields some information about when they come in weekly, what we need to do for professional development. So there is many reasons we're asking for that. It's not just for compliance. So it is actually part of the tracking process. But when we get into work with data, when we get into the DII, which is the data informed instruction for the second semester, we're going to need to know that they're working with those teachers with classworks. We're going to need to know that those professional learning communities are looking at those data sources. We're going to need to know that you've moved out of tier 2 and you're in tier 1. We need to know. So those are really vital pieces for us to track. So we'll know where those coaches are spending that time. Also, that blends into the work that the MTSS supervisor and coordinator, we're constantly having conversations in our own department. We meet hopefully every Monday. We try to anyway, where we're looking at that data from those academic coaches. We're looking at the data from the attendance. What are the social workers doing? So it's just a combination of us getting data to inform where we're going and where we've been.
Larry's got his hand up.
With this additional data that we're utilizing right now, I'm glad to hear that all this is being generated. This is real valuable. Are we also in discussions? I know we're just starting this, but so for next year, if a student's in the second grade now and they're going to third next year, what will their teacher next year receive on that student? Will they receive all of this information as well as like the RTA portfolio?
You want to share?
So the way that we're trying to roll this out in terms of each school has kind of like their own documentation process. Philip and I created a Google form, which is very similar to what the coach is using, for teachers to document and record any interventions. There's certain required documentation that has to come along with it. For example, anytime a child starts to receive interventions, parents have to be notified. If the intervention, if a decision is made to stop the intervention, they have to be notified. Or if there's a decision that there needs to be an increase or more intense intervention in place, then parents are notified as well. There are some problem-solving forms that teachers have to fill out that, for example, list the baseline data for the student, what area of need they have, and then also it includes where the teacher has to write in what intervention they're putting in place. So there's a Google form that collects all that information so that each school site at any time has that bird's eye view, because again, it throws it all into a spreadsheet and all that good stuff, so that the principal and the AP have access to and academic coaches have access to that data, and they can watch for that. So from one year to the next, they have that spreadsheet that will roll over.
Are we utilizing the RTA portfolios in the same way?
We're not using Read to Achieve portfolios anymore.
Okay.
No, we're not. We opted out,
3, 4 years ago, 4 years ago.
I got Craig's hand up, then I got Dr. Williams.
And I stepped out, you might have said this. We're doing this, the coach mentor person is doing this year with teachers. Okay,
Not with, they're doing this to document what they're doing.
what they're doing. Okay, is any more time necessarily with things like this? And like I said, when I stepped out, you might have covered it, with the new teachers.
Yes.
They getting more time than say that 20-year veteran.
Yes, so it's focused, so they actually have, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but they have a BT tracker and a teacher tracker. So for the BTs, because we're required to show exactly what you're doing with a BT, they fill out a form that shows exactly every piece of work they do with that BT. And so that we make sure that we address all those mentoring components that are required for the state based on our plan.
Dr. Williams.
And also all of the collection information, we're automatically building accreditation data that we need. So it's an automatic process. We're gonna be up for accreditation.
2023.
Right, but we'll automatically have everything that we need for accreditation through this process.
Truly, in terms of the data, we are really using the data to inform the work we're doing. We're just not arbitrarily saying, okay, well, we're gonna do this. Well, if it works, it works. What we're saying is let's do those pulse checks. Let's let's collaborate. Is this working? Is this not working? Why is it going well? Why is it not? We're just not making those decisions. We're using these pulse checks as we go because as we said earlier, success is incremental. It doesn't, at the very end, we don't want our academic coaches and our mentors to say to us this and this. We want those pulse checks along the way. I learned a very long time ago, data is to inform, not to intimidate.
That's right.
So we're not using data to intimidate. We're using data to inform the work that we're doing. We're collecting more data in my department than I've ever collected. We collect it routinely. We've had many conversations with the attendants we're looking at, with our social workers. We're looking at those C3s, those C6s. We're not going to wait till we get to a C10 to talk about them. That's a bit too late. You've missed 10 days. How many hours is that of the 1,025 that you've already lost? And as we saw earlier, if they're already in the skill gap area or the standards gap area, how much time do we have to waste? We just don't. So again, the data that we're checking with and bringing in is to inform, not to intimidate.
Brenda's got a question.
Ms. Buller, you mentioned a moment ago how you all contact the parents. And what about those parents that you cannot get up with? How's that child needs met?
So at each level, I mean, obviously, the first line of defense is that classroom teacher, trying to make those contacts. If they're not able to make contact, school social worker, guidance counselor, those YDS, all of those support services are coming into play.
So what we've done in the past, we started it last year, we'll do it even more. We did a collaborative effort between Indian Ed, our YDS. We pulled together a collaborative team and we started working through that process because YDS and social workers are very similar in the nature of the work. So what we've already talked about is that we will come together collectively as a team. I've already talked with Connie as well. When we get that data, we get that attendance, then we're going to say, okay, I can't reach 10 parents. So how are we going to make that happen? We don't have phone numbers, but we can go out and make those home visits. So we're putting all those pieces, those protective pieces in place right at this time, which is a new approach for us at the district level.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I want to say, as far as the coaches, just getting feedback from them. Every week we have them fill out feedback forms so that we know how to drive our professional development or additional needs that they may bring up. So we try to collect data in many different ways, like Ms. Freeman was talking about, to make sure that we have a pulse check on what's going on. And I'm also meeting with them individually to make sure there's no additional needs they just want to share with me that I can help them work through. So we're trying to set up supports for them, just like we're trying to set up supports for the teachers. So what I'd like to do is, you have the actual academic coach handbook behind the description of the academic coaches. What I'll ask you to do and challenge you to do, on the very next page, there should be some questions. One more. With the sheet with these questions on it, I ask you to look and take a moment and see what the coaches are expected to do in regards to these areas. And you actually have a sheet also to fill out that I think is right behind the handbook that looks like this with these questions on it. Questions are up there. The handbook. Find the handbook. It's right here. Right there.
Okay.
There's the, and I have the questions. You wanna take those out, you can take.
You see right here?
To take that out, I've got it behind you. One that you can write it on. Which one is it? So you're in this section, coaches.
Oh, that's pretty.
Handbook and then.
What do you want us to do?
Okay, so here's the handbook. There's a set of questions to see what the academic coaches.
In here?
This right here.
That's there and then two or 3 minutes to see if you can find a couple of those answers to those questions before we go through. And most of them are at the beginning of the book, around page 5, 6, 7 in those areas. Maybe about 1 more minute and we'll kind of go through these. find the weekly expectations of the coach? Anybody find that? Where can I find the weekly expectations of the coach?
Handbook.
Handbook. You got it right.
Yes.
100% on that one.
Close student achievement gap and accelerate learning.
So on page 6, you'll see halfway down, it talks about weekly, monthly expectation. It clearly outlines what they have to keep. So they have to keep a weekly schedule. So they keep a monthly calendar that they share with the principal to say, this is what I'm doing on a daily basis. So it shows them if they're observing, if they're doing lesson planning, if they're modeling, if they're doing professional development. So the principal quickly can see at a quick glance what they're working on. So they keep that in Google Calendar. Then what you'll see, they also keep that teacher tracker and that BT teacher tracker just to show if there's targeted teachers they're working with, what is the plan and what you're doing. This is between them and the teacher only because this is just so that they know the work that they're focused on. So then we have, what is the role of the academic coach? I think, Mr. Brewer, that's what you're starting to share. Where can we find that?
5.
Page 5. So it outlines, and just like with the, we think about a teacher or a student, it has that gradual release of responsibility. So if a teacher doesn't need me to come through during PLCs, that's what I'll do. I may not see them on a regular basis. What are the ongoing expectations of the coach and mentor? Where can we find those?
7.
7 and 8. So this kind of talks about what type of work they can do, so it depends on the teacher what they need. So they're not going to do this with every teacher. It really depends on what do I need as far as support, what does Philip need, what does each person need as far as what type of support. This just gives them an outline of how they can provide that support or strategies they can use. What about the purpose of the teacher tracker, we kind of talked about earlier, it's on page 6, but it's really just saying, what am I doing with this particular teacher? So if I have 2 focused teachers on top of my maybe 3 BTs, these are the teachers I spend a lot of time with because they need additional help. You may have identified them based on the data and the observations that you and the principal have seen, that I really need some additional help, so I'm coming around to help you. And I'm developing a plan with you. What evaluation tool is used? What page can I find that on? Early on. Look at page 6. I'll give you a hint. It's underlined. What's the name of their tool?
So Google form?
The actual evaluation for the academic coach mentor. What is it called? It's at the top. The teacher leadership specialist. So they're being evaluated on a tool that clearly aligns with the teacher evaluation. And then where can I find how often they must meet as far as BT 1, 2s, and 3s? Bottom of 6. So you'll notice you talked about, do I see every teacher all the time? No. Because what you'll see with BT 1, I meet how many times with them?
Once a week.
Once a week. BT 2's, the requirement is how many times?
Once a month.
Once a month, and then BT 3's is once a
9 weeks.
9 weeks. So you differentiate it based on those teachers' needs. Now, if they have needs for more support, they may still see more often, but that's minimum requirements as far as those teachers are concerned. And then where can I find what their focus of their coaching should be? Because sometimes it's hard to identify, how do I support a teacher?
Page 13.
Page 12, starting page 12 and 13, right. So what we've done is provide some guidance. Who should I work with during those months? Based on those needs, who are usually my target teachers? So if you look, for example, at August and September, those teachers that are usually new or beginning teachers or returning teachers struggling with behavior management. Because we know if they can't get their class under control, it's going to be really hard to put all those other things in place. So it kind of helps direct where they target their attention throughout the year. If they don't have any of that going on, then they can look at other pieces. But it kind of helps direct them month by month. Where do I provide or where do I send my support with those teachers? Okay? So you can spend more time looking at this later, but that's just the resource we give the coaches and go through as we're doing the training to talk about what does your coaching look like and how can you make sure that you're focused on those needs of those individual teachers. Any questions about academic coaches? We go through a couple more pieces. Okay, if not, can you? So the other couple pieces that do come out of the funding that help with this piece is, of course, assistant principals like we talked about before. The assistant principals are there to focus on those operations in the building. So that's why we have now one assistant principal in every building so that the principal can be that instructional leader. And the piece that you probably have not spoken about a lot is the district tech staff. There were 3 additional technicians hired out of this funding because of all the technologies that has been purchased to make sure that all the pieces are working, like the swivels, like all the computers, because we know there's a lot of technology in this district. Any other questions about those positions?
Mr. But the tech positions, where are they housed? Where, are they just generally?
They're general technicians, they're at
Okay.
central office.
Okay, thank you.
So they're not housed in each.
These are 3 technicians to work on the actual work of the Google, Chromebooks and those types of things. So when service needs arise, they can help support all those different pieces that are coming into the district.
And they were, the schools did have the opportunity to actually hire technology assistants in Title I. So if they chose and felt the need was there, the comprehensive needs assessment led to that, they did put that position in Title I. So they had that opportunity to get it at the school level as well.
Yes.
Good job, darling.
Ron's got the floor.
Chairman Smith, Superintendent Williams, and board members, office staff. This is a brief update on the Red Springs High School athletic complex. Most of you know, Hanson Construction won they were the winning bidders for phase 1 and phase 2 of this project. Phase 1 consists of erosion control, clearing and grading, and getting the site ready for the second phase. The second phase will consist of the baseball, softball fields with irrigation, dugouts, press boxes, batting cages, concession stand, an 8-lane track, paved parking lot, fencing, main entrance gate, and must-go lights. Hanson Construction started phase 2 on July 12th. They gave us a schedule of 245 days to have the project complete. That was if they could get all the materials in on time. They are struggling to get some of the materials in at this time, I do know that. But that timeline will put us around March the 14th with baseball, softball games in the spring to start around March 1st. So hopefully that timeline will be met, but I know it'll be a struggle to meet that deadline. DPI has reviewed the plans for the buildings on the project. They've sent back their review with some recommendations and some requirements. The engineers are working to get those complete at this time. We do have a few pictures. If you can go back to the first one. So this is a diagram of the entire complex. If you look to the right, that's the parking lot. There's 2 main entrances that come into the parking lot. And then there'll be a main entrance gate there around the baseball field. You also see the softball field and the track, and everything will be fenced in.
Can we get a copy of that?
From the road out there, this is the.
Hold on a minute. Got a question? You have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to have a copy of that overall grid whenever you get the time.
Sir,
I'd like to have a copy of the simple plan layout.
yeah, I've got a copy of that. I can get you. Anybody else want what, I can get that also. This picture here is a shot from the road. And that will be the parking lot. Like I said, it will be paved at some point. That'll be the last thing that they'll come in and do is pave that parking lot. This is a picture of the construction, that actually this week, installing the water lines through the fields for the irrigation system. And that's the softball field that they're working on now. This is a shot of the track that they are currently grading and getting ready. They're having to dig a bunch of dirt out and pile it over at the back part of the facility. And then they'll take that dirt and reuse it also. But that's the track right there that they're working on. This is a picture of the press box. For some reason, that picture makes that press box look just wide. It's not really that wide. But that's a picture of the press box there on the softball field. And the baseball, softball field, press box will be the same size. This is a shot from behind second base on the baseball field. And you can see the dugouts and the press box there in the background. And, you know, and when we started talking about doing the dugouts and the press boxes, we wanted to make them big enough. So 5 years, 6 years from now, nobody can come back and say, hey, you know, the dugouts are too small. We need to do something to the dugouts. We need to do something to the press box. I've heard Mr. Ernie say more than one time, spend your money one time. So that's basically what we're doing on this project. What you see here is the concession stand. This is what the concession stand will look like after it's finished, after it's completed. The picture on the left is the original colors that we wanted. But what happened with the roof is we could not get the roof color the same color as the school color. So it would have been two different reds. We had to compromise to the picture on the right, and we went with a gray roof. And we think the gray's gonna look awesome out there. We wanted to just light the entire complex up in red, is what we wanted to do. That's the school color, but we didn't want to have two different shades of red out there. This is a picture of what the dugout will look like. Again, this is the one on the right with the gray roof. That's what it'll look like after it's complete. This is what the press box will look like after it's complete. And what we done was put the Red Devil logos on all of the buildings out there also, to highlight their mascot. And this is what the final, the main entrance gate will look like. Again, the one on the right. And again, it's gonna be nice. It'll be something that the town of Red Springs High School, and not just Red Springs, but the entire county can be proud of. This is gonna be a top of the line facility. And thank you all. Thank you, board, Dr. Williamson, Chairman Smith, for getting this project done for us, getting it up and off the ground. Thank you.
Love it. Beautiful. Good job.
Thank you, John.
Good job.
Chairman Smith, Dr. Williamson, board members, and district office staff, my responsibility today is going to talk about how we're going to use our ESSER 2 and 3 funds in planning and improving our operational effectiveness. As we talk about this, one of a few things I'd like for us to constantly keep in our mind, and hopefully teachers and the public will remember this as well, the money that we have is not necessarily just a blank check, that we just go out and begin to spend money on things that we believe we need in our building. Everything we're spending our money on is gonna center around these three questions. When we spend the money, can we answer these? Are we spending the money in prevention of, reduction of, and response to COVID? So again, when we begin to look at our line items next, Cole, we don't have a blank check to just go out and spend money in HVAC. We have to spend money in HVAC to answer, again, these three questions: prevention of, reduction of, and in response to. So we have two different pots of money we're going to start working on in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So as Dr. Williamson stated earlier, we're beginning to slice this elephant up. If you look at these are some major dollar amounts and some major undertakings that we're going to do over the next 2 to 4 years. And there's no way that we could manage all of this if we hit the ground running and said we're going to do all of this tomorrow. So we begin to slice the elephant up, and we're going to talk about what we put as our top priorities in stage 1, I guess, if you want to look at that. And when we begin to manage these, then we're going to move to our next set, Nicole. So one of the top priorities is to improve the air quality in our schools. So we have budgeted $12 million here to place air purifiers in all of our spaces within our buildings. We know that this is an automatic check on all 3 of those. So we are going to purchase in excess of about 2,100 air purifiers that are going to go in all of these spaces in our buildings. what I need you guys to help us with and the public to help us with, we're not gonna get 2,100 devices in 1 week. From what the manufacturer's been able to share with us, we're gonna get about 180 a week. So that means we're gonna have to have a dissemination plan that says, this week, 180 devices are going into these buildings. Next week, another 180, and so on. This is gonna roll out to be about a 3-month project. So we're gonna have to stick to whatever roadmap that our team lays out in order to reach everyone by the end of that 3rd month. So whenever that plan comes out, we're gonna need your help in telling the public, you're gonna get yours. But remember, we can only give you 180, we can only manage 180 a week. So in ordering 2,100 devices, I've spread that out, and again, that's gonna be a 12-week project to get these air purifiers in classrooms, in office spaces, in media centers. So we're not gonna be able to make that phone call and say, well, hey, Ms. Smith needs one in her class, and she may be on week 10. This is gonna be very strategic in how we roll this out, because these are gonna have to be rolled out along with all of the other duties that some of our maintenance department's gonna have as well.
When you say strategic, Bobby, can you give a little more detail? Are we starting at the high schools? Are we starting at elementary? Or, I mean, what is the plan? And
But we have
can't get them all at one.
We have not finalized anything at this point. My plan in my head would be, do it kind of in a region where if I can get 3 schools and I hit 180, then I'm gonna stop. And then I may go, down the road, if I can get 3 schools, hit 180 and stop, and do it in terms of a region. So we're not going, say, from Fairmont to drop off 50 and then turning around and going to St. Paul's and dropping off 70. So my intent would be to work in regions, but again, with that magic number being 180 every week.
Terry?
I think during the finance subcommittee meeting the other night, I think Ms. Erica said that we had to get a waiver from DPI to purchase these.
We already have. It's been approved.
Okay,
We submitted a waiver through the non-competitive procurement process through federal programs, and we've already gotten the letter back that DPI has approved the purchase.
so why do we have to do a waiver? Because of the vendor or what?
So, there's a couple of reasons. There's about 8 different reasons you can do a waiver. One of them is public emergency. And part of that is the supply chains and things that are going on right now. So we need to go with somebody who has these in stock.
Was it a sole source vendor thing?
Yes,
Okay, gotcha.
yes. I'm sorry.
So you saying-
Go straight to that and answer the question.
So that's just you saying that, because that goes back to what he said is the vendor. They're state-approved vendors, is that what you're saying?
No, what we're saying is the type of air purifier, there's lots of air purifiers out there.
Sure.
The market's saturated with them. But there's some unique things to this particular one, the commercial size, the type of filter process and where it comes from that makes this vendor a sole source provider of these. Even though the market is flooded with them, all of them do something different. This particular purifier kills the virus, whereas some of the other ones capture it. So it doesn't kill, this one kills it, the one we went with. And like I say, there's little nuances to all the air purifiers that make them slightly different. But also the public emergency part was a reason we got it, not just because of it being a social.
What part of money did this come out of?
I'm sorry.
What part?
Yes, sir.
Extra two, gotcha.
So
Okay.
if you go back to the previous,
Wait just 1 minute. Henry had his hand up, and I think Dr. Williams.
I got you.
I understand your strategic plan going out and it'd be easier to keep up with. But what comes to my mind is the fact that a certain age group is going to be targeted as to who's going to have access to vaccination. And for that reason, I would think that we would probably want to consider elementary grades first. But that's just a thought.
and we can definitely do that, but like I said, just remember, we're only getting 180
Understood.
a week. So, again, if that's the way we want to target it, just remember our manpower, that's gonna have to go behind pushing these out every week over a 3-month period.
Dr. Williams?
The other part for the sole source was the service after the sale, there's a local office that can correct.
Yes, correct. The local office, is gonna come in, a couple of things is gonna be willing to help us get these in what we call bag and tag. Get them into our system, get them inventoried and, willing to assist us. And also the filters that would go into these, he has those readily available.
Do we have a?
Dwayne, Dwayne had his hand up.
One quick question, the 180 a week, is it a big setup, or is it 180 in and boom, there it takes?
Well, we're gonna
Set them up or whatever.
What he shared with me, that would be 3 tractor trailer loads. So of course, we're gonna have to unload the tractor trailers, get them in. Miss Erica, tag them with a blue tag, put them in our inventory system, assign them to a school. And then once we do that, then we have to get them delivered to the school.
Okay, the setup to the school.
Oh, it's plug and play,
Plug and play, okay,
plug and play.
okay, I got you.
There may be some, in larger spaces, the vendor has said, they'll have a person that will come in and look at the ceiling and the dimensions of the room to see how many we need in larger spaces. But for our regular classrooms, one will work. We've checked those dimensions.
Terry, you have a hand, did you got a question?
Sure, one of them, or what they'll look like?
No, but I can send you the pamphlet that was shared with us. I'll be glad to send you the pamphlet that was given to us.
And
So, Mr. Bobby, that's why you said do it in region, because of the manpower and everything would be more efficient that way.
Now, that was just one thought that I've got. Again, we've not nailed down the dissemination plan. I guess our main message is please understand and please communicate to our teachers and the public that.
you nail it down between now and the board meeting, just add it, and if you come up with a plan, just for information only, let us know if it's
Super.
what region and where you plan to start and game plan. Anything else?
Okay, cool.
Go ahead, you.
Next, again, please remember this is not a blank $6.6 million check, but for ESSER2, I've had Mr. Ernie to go in and identify our highest need areas. At this point in time, that could use some HVAC work to improve the air quality in the building. So again, this is not to say that these are the only schools that have issues, but in dealing with ESSER2, these are our top priorities. So we have some thoughts here. Again, there are going to be some different regulations that we're going to have to make sure we jump through the hoops in order to ensure the work we do here meets the standard that the federal government has set.
Erica got it.
So I'll put my party in to say that the 6.6 million, as Mr. Ernie and Mr. Bobby work through the priorities, it may not mean we can reach every one of these schools, but again, there's the order. So we'll go in order of the ones that need the most work until the money runs out for that area, and then maybe we can reassess.
This list here, Mr. Ernie, is this like Lumberton Junior High? Is this the ones that need the most work, or have you determined that yet?
Lumberton Junior High is a total electric school built back in the 60s.
Need it.
And your equipment is very inefficient. It works, but the earth.
I think what he's asking, Mr. Ernie, is the list that's presented, is it already in ranked order, or is it just in a random order?
That's why
on this?
Lumberton Junior is number one, but that is the order. And don't forget also that there's a few extra 100,000 that's left over from that base once on
There again, what I'd like to know, when you get to it, if this is the list and this is the priority, and Erica says you might not be able to complete the whole list, if you start with Lumberton Junior High, at some point, I'd like to know the dollar amounts associated to each site.
Yes, so get that, right, yes.
And that's our next step. After today, our next step, everything we're going over today is slices of that elephant, and we're gonna hit the ground running on Monday.
Slice him up.
Brenda,
So,
Brenda,
so Mr. Ernie, Rosenwald didn't fit into that category at all? Because of being one of the older schools?
she actually did Rosenwald fit in there anywhere?
Yeah, the last time they went through Saks, it was upgraded, the older building was. And we've taken care of the pre-K buildings and the older buildings. They're cooling.
I was meaning the one that's the old building.
That's it, yeah, that's the one that was done back
I
in the
didn't,
day.
okay.
Yes, ma'am. This all has a ducted system with fresh air coming in and out.
Okay, I didn't notice it, but okay, thank you.
So that's the reason, but he'll be getting some roof attention as well on the auditorium. To answer your question, your first 5 schools, 5.6 million, and you still got a couple of $100,000 to pull off some things at St. Paul's Elementary and St. Paul's Middle, plus 2 chillers, one at Magnolia and one at Prospect. So that's your dollar amount if you want to know it. That's engineer. And
I don't just want to know it, I want to see it.
yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
So next, we've also allocated $6 million for playgrounds. And again, this is a priority list of the first 11. So, if Cole, if you would flip to the next one. So these are just snapshots of a handful of playgrounds, in our district. As you can see here, we need some work in our playgrounds, and we have the prime opportunity to get some things done there. So, again, after this meeting, we're gonna hit the ground running with putting proposals out to get playgrounds at all of our schools. If you would like, I can send you all of the pictures of every school that I visited, the first 11. So the picture on the left is St. Paul's Elementary. The one in the middle also is St. Paul's Elementary. The top right is Fairgrove, and if I'm not mistaken, the date on that equipment goes back to the 1950s, and they have just some swings and a slide there. And the one in the bottom right is Deep Branch. So, go ahead.
Erica's got the floor.
I just wanted to reiterate that Mr. Bobby said the first 11. We will be touching every playground, but he's prioritized that. I just want to reiterate because I didn't want anybody to say, well, why only these 11? All the playgrounds at the elementary level will be touched. It's just prioritized. And I probably played on those swings at Fairgrove and got a tooth knocked out on those.
Played on them too.
I did too.
Ow.
All the playground equipment probably be the same, will it be you?
So again, and these are just our thoughts. So not to say every school's gonna get both of these, but our intent is to put something very similar to these, at least one at every site, and depending on the population size, you would get one of these and possibly a smaller set. But what I can send you, because again, I didn't want to waste a lot of space in the presentation, I'll send you what I have proposed at each site. But what we're looking at is one of these, a set of swings, of course, and depending on the population of the school, one of these, a smaller set, and a set of swings. So when we get finished, all 22 or 23 of our elementary schools will have identical playground equipment from top to bottom.
Great.
That's encouraging
Yes, it is.
Very good.
for all these years. I know that the money's good and and it's a blessing that we got it. This stuff's been talked about and needed for years. Some of the retired principals here or been principals or associates or whatever. This is all encouraging, I'm telling you.
And
Henry's got a question.
I was just wondering if we could, or if we could fit it in the guidelines to maybe consider a small shelter associated with each playground. It can't fit, it don't meet the guidelines.
The way the ESSER grant was written and based on the needs, we can provide this, but the shelter was not written into that.
Okay, and I would think we would consider it as a outside class in definition.
We have some outdoor classes.
Yes.
We can look at that and see how where the spacing or where that would go. We can look at it. I can't promise that it'll be something we'd be able to do, but we do have outdoor classrooms as part of ESSER.
That's my point.
Okay, and one of the things here's a slice of elephant we've already eaten. The purchase order has been submitted for 15 new activity buses. We do not anticipate delivery of those until February or March. These will become part of the central office fleet, and 3 of those buses will be handicap accessible.
Right.
So again, if we go back to our 3 founding questions, we can justify using our money here in the terms of being able to spread kids out. Instead of packing a lot of kids on one bus, we have multiple buses for kids to be able to use.
And you'll give us an update as to who's getting what, and who, where to go.
Well, the 15 buses are going to be part of the central office fleet. We have not made a decision to assign those to schools. So just like I think it's 6 or 7 we currently have, these 15 will become part of that fleet. And when schools get ready to use them, they will just use our checkout system as they have in the past.
Okay.
That's good.
That's good.
And I do want to add one thing, if I can, to the playground equipment. Once we finish our 22, depending on the funding we have left, our intent is those schools that have self-contained classrooms to come back and build adaptive playgrounds for those places as well.
Great,
Good job.
wonderful, good job.
Thank you, Mr. Bobby.
Thank you.
3 minutes. Chairman Smith, Superintendent Williamson, members of the board, and district leaders. We want to bring this to your attention. We are one of the few districts in the surrounding area that does not have a full employment policy for classified employees. And so what we did, we reached out to the North Carolina School Board Association and asked for their assistance in creating one. And what they did, they based the information that they gave us, they based it on surrounding school districts. They made some minor changes for clarity, and they gave us a suggested policy number being 6316/740. And that number is just so that it would fit our policy manual. Mr. Bobby checked into some surrounding schools, because our dilemma right now is the overtime that we're paying employees to do, whether it's a cafeteria employee or a custodian, and they're also driving a bus. A lot of our teacher assistants are driving a bus, and that runs into overtime pay, which is very expensive. So, what most districts have done is created a dual employment policy so that in the future, even when it's passed, we would require that classified employees are willing to get their bus license, and it would be within, I think the policy states 90 days after they're hired. We're talking about regular teacher assistants. We would not ask, for example, an CTA because they are required to be in the classroom monitoring students. We would not ask anyone who is, monitoring students at all times or whatever. So our largest group of people would be regular teacher assistants. And most districts have had a lot of success with it. There's advantages and disadvantages. And so for today, we're just bringing it to your attention, something for you to think about. Look at the policy on your own to see how it's worded. And of course, when we have policy meetings, then when we decide to do this, we'll have at least 2 reads and words if we need to. Mr. Henry?
In relation to this too, I would like to have, clarification on the policy or procedure we're practicing to pay as far as the overlapping. Between school instructional time and time that a bus driver is being paid. Like schools, if the school bus driver's getting on a bus at 2:45 or 3, whatever it is, and their time legally is not over until 3:15, we got a 15, 20, 30-minute gap there that then we can't pay them twice. Right. So let's make sure we got clarification on that when we come out with this.
Go ahead, Eric.
I'm I'm not sure how we can clarify that because you can't pay them, they're already getting paid to be in their other position, so it's not like they're not getting payment, so I'm not sure how we would clarify that. You can't pay them multiple times for the same hour.
That's right.
Miss Erica,
Yes.
now we discussed, the 75-25 or the 80-20. That could be, how it's separated. You know, they might be 75% TA, 25% bus driver, and then that way, that kind of separates it to show you are a bus driver from 6 in the morning to 7:45. Just an example, I'm not sure exactly how it would end up, and then in the afternoons, your time as a TA would end at 2:45. You are now a bus driver until 4 o'clock. 25, 75, 80, 20, we would have to see how that works. So that is a suggestion as to another way that we could write this into our policy.
And there's
I
pros and cons to both of those ways that we can
Right.
discuss.
Exactly.
We want y'all to bring us a recommendation and then we'll vote on it.
Right.
Craig had his hand up, Dr. Emmanuel, then Terry.
Just very similar to what Ms. Thompson said. And I don't know if this is still what we're doing. If school got out at 3 o'clock and you're a TA, you're paid as a TA to 3 o'clock. Your bus time starts technically, say 3:01. If you're getting out at 3:15, you started getting bus pay at 3:15. And your TA went to 3:15 till school got out. You couldn't be that dual pay. You couldn't get paid for two jobs at the same time. And it's just wherever that happened, that's where it started and stopped. Now, like I said, I'm like Mr. Mike, give us a plan, we'll vote on it and go from there. Now, this is, and I'm looking at these dates, this will be for people, when we put dates in, that's hired now. Won't be going back and getting somebody that's been doing this for 10 years, okay?
That's right, we grandfather those folks in. Want to make it clear, it is a condition of employment.
Now,
No,
when we approve the policy and go from there.
employment, that they'll sign that agreement, that I understand, I'm a dual employee, and I have to get a bus license, drive a bus.
Can I ask a question?
That would be for new hires moving
What did
forward.
it say?
Yes.
Wait, what, Dr. Emmanuel, what'd you say?
I just have one question. In developing this policy, will there be any exemptions for any reason? New hires, teacher assistants, I'm just curious. Do you foresee any exemptions, Dr. Williamson?
There could be some medical, but keep in mind, these are traditional TAs. But those folks that probably could work in EC, pre-K, where by law, you have to have those kinds of things. So they could be, but we will have information up front, and if medically you cannot drive, keep in mind, it is a condition.
But that's what I was thinking, when the policy's written, there might be some kind of statement that protect us against, with an exemption.
Terry's got the floor.
I'm good.
Good now?
And
Brenda?
and Dr. Williamson, if we have a bus driver that wish to help with janitorial services, because it's so short in maintenance, that will be allowed for existing employees also.
But they're gonna go through that process.
Right.
Right, right. They can do that now.
That's what
Wayne.
I'm saying.
Dwayne's got the floor.
Just like Mike said, get it together, send it to us, and we'll vote on it. It's 12:04.
Anything else?
That's the meeting.
Anything else, Melissa? Anything else on your end?
Thank you.
That's right, 12:04. Thank y'all so much for the conversation. District team, thank you, very well done. Just appreciate this opportunity. We do have lunch ready, you can get a takeout on that. Lawson, will you bless the food service? Go eat.
Dear gracious, kind Heavenly Father, thank you for your mercy, grace, and love. Dear Heavenly Father, bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies for your service. We ask this in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen.